We're at the Joint Minerals, Economic Development and Business Committee meeting in Casper, Wyoming. Yes, sir. Before we start into our agenda, we got a couple things we got to get out of the way. One is that tomorrow, June 6th, 1944, is 82 years since D-Day. Now, that's older than anybody in the room.
I think so.
Well, maybe not Cooper, but and Senator Cooper has some information on D-Day that he'd like to pass along. So I'll turn it over to Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So June 6, 1944 was a Tuesday. A nasty, cold, rainy day on the English Channel. 5 to 6 foot seas, 15 to 20 mile an hour winds. Wasn't a very pleasant day. 156,000 Allied troops total were involved in the invasion. 73,000 of those were Americans. 34,000 landed, just over 34,000 landed at Omaha Beach, 23,000 at Utah Beach, and 15,500 airborne. Can you imagine what that looked like? There today, there are 9,389 graves at the Omaha Beach Cemetery, the American cemetery. There's still a Canadian cemetery. There's a German cemetery. There's a lot of folks there. Of those 9,389 graves, 307 are unknown. There's a wall of the missing. Besides those graves, there's 1,557 soldiers that went missing that day and weren't recovered. Among those graves, there are 45 sets of brothers buried side by side. That's pretty impressive to me. There were 1,575 of the LCM Higgins boats, landing craft. 10 of those sank before they ever made it ashore. So a pretty fascinating thing. If you haven't made that pilgrimage to Normandy and to Omaha Beach, it's something you should do and go and look at. If you're not moved by 9,389 white crosses, you're pretty soulless. So it's an amazing place. Thank you.
One of my exchange students, Rotary exchange students, was from Normandy, and his father had a horse farm right next to Normandy. And they had a high regard for all Allied troops, but Americans especially, because we sacrificed so many people on that beach. So tomorrow, remember D-Day. And Pierre from France has a report for us today, not from Normandy, but we requested we get some information on the various states and what they're doing. So,
well, Mr. Chairman, I just wonder if we should begin with the topic we carried over from yesterday, the Energy Transmission Loan Program.
No.
Okay.
No, but I should do a roll call just to see if anybody's here.
Senator Cooper?
Here.
Senator Jones?
Here.
Senator Nethercott?
Yeah.
Say excused.
No, she's going to be on Zoom.
But she's not.
Well,
So you have to say excused.
oh
That's how
no,
that works.
excuse.
Senator Rothfuss?
Here.
Representative Campbell?
Excused.
Representative Knapp?
Here.
Representative Larson?
Here.
Representative Lawley?
Here.
Representative Riggins?
Here.
Representative Schmidt?
Excused.
Representative Tarver?
Oh,
Here.
Representative Weber?
Here.
Co-Chairman Heiner?
Here.
Chairman Anderson?
here.
You have a quorum.
We have a quorum? All right. Well, we can get on with it then. I would like to start with the report from Pierre instead of starting with Krager. Pierre, let's go ahead with that report, please. I think it's in your folder
Yes.
too.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Pierre Chenet with LSO. I'll provide a very brief overview of the research memorandum on economic development structures in Wyoming's neighboring states that the committee requested at the previous meeting. Due to the short turnaround time between meetings, please note that this is a brief, non-exhaustive review of other states' economic frameworks. For each state, the memorandum identifies the primary economic development entity as identified by the U.S. Economic Development Administration. And for Wyoming, that entity is the Wyoming Business Council. The memo is structured to cover three main areas in every surveyed state. So the first area is the economic entities statutory framework. And it offers a review of the statutory authority, purposes, and duties of those entities. Number two is the economic entities organizational structure, and it offers a review and explains the different divisions and offices that compose those entities. And the third and final component is a non-exhaustive list of programs that are administered by these entities. I want to note that this memorandum does not evaluate the efficiency or efficacy of these programs. The programs that are listed are included strictly for as examples and not as policy recommendations. And to make comparisons easier across states, the memo is organized by where the statewide economic development entity is located within state government. So within the governor's office, as in Colorado, South Dakota, and Utah, as a separate executive agency, as in Idaho and Nebraska, or a what I call a hybrid structure, as in Montana, which has both an office within the governor's office and a separate executive agency, the Montana Department of Commerce. There are three items that I want to highlight for this presentation. Number one is Utah's restructuring of the economic framework in 2021 and 2025, and that is covered on pages 18 through 21. Number two is Nebraska's statutory requirement that mandates a performance review of the Nebraska Department of Economic Development every 3 years, and that is covered on page 32. And number three is the role of partners, public entities, and boards, specifically in South Dakota, to administer and oversee financial assistance programs, including the approval of loans and grants. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Question here.
Mr. Chenet, thank you very much. As you looked at these different states and they have vastly different economic development programs, can you give us an idea how success one state has been over the other? If there's any leading state that has performed better than the other states you looked at?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Heiner, I would be hesitant to answer that question. I know that Utah tends to rank higher on economic development metrics, but I'm not sure what the methodology for these rankings are, and I would be hesitant to attribute that success to the structure of their development, economic development framework. I'm not sure how the methodology is formulated to come up with these rankings. But Utah and Idaho tend to be higher on these rankings, as well as Colorado, I believe.
Or did you find any of these neighboring states that were considering eliminating their economic development group because they didn't need them anymore?
Mr. Chairman, no, the only thing is that Utah has restructured their economic development framework over the last 5 years. They had the Utah Governor's Office of Economic Development, and then they created a commission, and the commission was a strategy setting entity that gave objectives to the newly created Governor's Office of Economic Development, but then they deleted that commission. Everything rests within the Governor's Office of Economic Development. And then in the memo, I also talk about South Dakota. It used to be a separate executive agency, but then they created an office within the governor's office. So that would be the closest to a large-scale reformation of economic development frameworks in those states.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Riggs.
Chairman. By chance, was considering the different economic sectors we have, our energy sector versus some of those other states, did you notice anything that other states focusing on energy infrastructure, maybe to the extent we do, or maybe trying to enhance their energy and find out? I'm just curious if there are distinctions.
Chairman Anderson, Representative Riggins, I can't think of anything specific on top of my head. I would need to look at the states again. No, I don't have anything in mind at the moment.
Other question? Yes. Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. More of at least an answer with regard to Utah in the last question by Representative Riggins is that I know they have a department or office of energy in the governor's office. So I think they work together with, my understanding is from talking to people in those departments, together with the economic development group, but they have a real focus on energy and quite frankly, economic development. That's something to be admired. I think how hard they lean into their state's assets and to work together. So, but they do have the separate also Department of Energy. It does a lot of the same kinds of work our Wyoming Energy Authority does, but it's positioned differently in the administration of that state, which I think is a very interesting and good idea.
Other questions for Pierre? Other questions? All right. Well, the Frenchman is done then. Remember tomorrow. And now we'll move on to yesterday. Yesterday's news. Yesterday's news, we have Rob Krieger up for the Energy Transmission Loan Program.
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to go over the bill first?
If you would.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, 27 LSO 24 should have draft 0.4. This is 6-02 in the online meeting materials. This is a bill draft that the committee requested in April and would create a new loan program for energy transmission projects, and the bill draft specifies conditions and requirements for the loan program. The staff comment on page 2 just notes that this basic structure is based on another loan program that the legislature recently enacted, simply to provide a format as kind of a starting place for this bill draft. And the percentages, the amounts, the conditions, the source of funding that are in this bill draft are really included as placeholders. It's up to the committee to decide how to proceed with those decisions, some of which include the agency to administer the program, the amount of funding available for loans and the source of that funding, the entities that may or may not be eligible for loans, the terms and conditions and rates, as well as eligible uses for these loan funds, whether it's for new construction, maintenance, whether it's for new infrastructure or used to expand the capacity of existing infrastructure. And then, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, just for your reference, we also included in the meeting materials, this is 6-07, the statutes that are in existing law for the Wyoming Energy Authority to finance other projects. And that might be a separate attachment that we placed on your desk yesterday. But just wanted to make you aware that those statutes are out there and have been in law since even before the Energy Authority was created from the merger of the Wyoming Pipeline Authority and the Wyoming Infrastructure Authority. So jumping into the bill draft, Mr. Chairman, on the top of page 3 are definitions of the bill. It defines the director as the director of OSLI, energy transmission infrastructure, and this is really what the loans could be used for. So it's any property or infrastructure that is used to transport or deliver electric energy, but does not include any property or facility for generation, for electricity generation. Financial institutions is page 3, line 12, is a bank or a credit union that's chartered under state or federal law and has a place of business in Wyoming. And then public utility, and this is a key definition because these are the entities that would be eligible to apply for these loans, is any person, including cooperative electric utilities, that performs any of the functions that an electric utility would, as provided in statute. The person has to be authorized to engage in business in Wyoming and has to be primarily engaged in the generation, transmission, or sale of electric energy. It also includes an electric utility owned or operated by a city or town. So municipal electric utilities would be eligible applicants as well. So moving on to page 4, this creates a new section of statute that creates the Energy Transmission Loan Program. And then on page 4, line 14, requires the Office of State Lands and Investments to administer the program. Again, this simply a placeholder. It's up to the committee to decide which agency may or may not be best suited for doing this. Page 4, line 17 requires the State Loan and Investment Board to promulgate rules necessary to implement the program. Moving on to page 5, establish a process by which financial institutions can register to administer and process the loans under this program. SLIB must develop an application for these loans, including specifying whatever documentation is required to apply, and then provide applications to participating financial institutions. Line 10, SLIB must review all applications from public utilities and participating financial institutions to ensure that the loans are approved and made in accordance with this bill draft. And then finally, SLIB would oversee the disbursement and repayment of funds from these loans. Page 5, line 18 describes the process by which loans are made. So applications must be filed with a registered financial institution, or if there's none available, the Office of State Lands and Investments. The application, I'm on the top of page 6 now, must include information on the energy transmission project and whether the project will create new transmission capacity or expand existing capacity. Page 6, line 9, requires the financial institution and OSLI to review the application to determine whether it qualifies for a loan. In making this determination, OSLI may request the assistance of the Public Service Commission, the Energy Authority, and any other governmental entity. And upon receiving a request for that assistance must be provided by the applicable governmental entity. On page 7, line 1, the financial institution and the director of OSLI must forward a recommendation to the State Loan and Investment Board as to whether to approve or reject the loan, as well as any terms or conditions that must be included. Page 7, line 7, upon a receipt of a recommendation from the director and a financial institution, the State Loan and Investment Board must review the application and ensure that the public utility qualifies. And if so, the director may approve the application and once approved, disperse the funds either to the financial institution for disbursement to the applicant or directly to the applicant. Any approval must specify the terms and conditions that shall be included. And loans qualifying for disbursement shall not require further approval from the State Loan and Investment Board. Page 8, line 4 specifies the purposes for which these loans may be used. And there are two. First, the construction of new energy transmission infrastructure, or second, the renovation, retrofitting, or expansion of existing energy infrastructure in Wyoming, provided that expansion or retrofitting results in increased capacity. Page 8, line 15 specifies some of the required terms and conditions of these loans. So first, beginning on line 18, an origination fee of 2% that would be distributed to the financial institution or the Office of State Lands and Investments if there is not a financial institution for processing the loan. The applicant must pay that 2% fee, and the office can require an additional fee if necessary to account for a decreased investment earnings as a result of making the loan. Page 9, line 6, the loan cannot exceed the aggregate amount specified in the next section, which is $200 million. Page 9, line 9, no single loan can exceed $50 million. Again, Mr. Chairman, these are figures that are simply placeholders and would be up for the committee to determine what those numbers should be. Page 9, line 13, the loan must be, yes.
Did you say 200 million? I think it says 50 million.
So Mr. Chairman, on that paragraph 2 on line 6, it says not exceed the aggregate amount. And that aggregate amount, which is specified later in the bill draft, is 200 million.
Okay.
And then a single loan could not exceed 50 million.
Okay,
But again, Mr. Chairman, those are numbers simply as placeholders, entirely up to the committee to make that determination.
okay.
Then page 9, line 13 requires any loan to be secured with the energy infrastructure that's going to be constructed or renovated with the loan. Page 9, line 20 are repayment terms. So on line 22, full repayment has to be not later than 30 years after the loan is issued. And then moving on to page 10, interest has to be charged at a rate that is not less than the rate of return earned on the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account, or 3%. Then page 10, line 8, the public utility makes repayments to the office, and upon receiving those payments, the office is required to deposit the repayments along with any interest or fees into the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account. Page 10, line 14 is a reporting requirement on the loan program to this committee. And then moving on to page 11, this is the source of the funding. So page 11, line 2 would authorize the director of OSLI with the approval of the governor to borrow up to $200 million to provide funding for the loans. So the funds would come from the LSRA in the form of a loan and then are repaid as those loan repayments are made. And then page 11, line 10 would require the OSLI director to report to JAC and this committee once that borrowing authority is exercised. Page 11, line 17 is rulemaking authority, and then a split effective date. The rulemaking is effective immediately. The remainder of the bill is effective July 1, 2027. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer questions.
All throughout, we talk about only doing this with public utilities. Is there any need to do it with anybody else? I think of a project down south of Rollins that is not necessarily a public utility, but they may apply for a loan for something like this. But this is strictly for public utilities.
So Mr. Chairman, on the bottom of page 3, so starting on line 22 and then the top of page 4, the definition of public utility, I think is drafted in a way that's fairly broad. So it's not just a typical public utility, but it's any person who is performing the functions of an electric utility. So it does not necessarily have to be a regulated utility under the Public Service Commission to be a qualified applicant for this loan. So long as they're primarily engaged in the business of generating or transmitting electricity, they would be an eligible applicant.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Brian? Any other questions for Brian? Welcome, Representative Campbell. I was welcoming you. Representative Knapp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does there need to be any correlation with rate increases, or does the Public Service Commission just acknowledge that in their justifications?
Rate increases on the percent of the loan?
Yeah, if
So-
if a utility decided to have included in their rate increases based on a loan from this program, and how much that could be, or if that's just a consideration that PSC will consider when a rate increase occurs.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Knapp, that's not knowledge in my wheelhouse, unfortunately. I'm not sure how a utility, a regulated utility would account for a loan under this section for the energy transmission infrastructure and bringing any rate case. So unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you for that question.
But I think you're right. I think the PSC would make a decision on that. Other questions? Representative Riggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would that loan be conditional that the transmission has to serve not a specific customer or the general population?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, The draft doesn't include any condition like that. Really, the only two conditions are that project would create new transmission capacity or expand the infrastructure in a way that expands existing transmission capacity.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Krager, for staying over. We appreciate it. It saved us a lot of time yesterday, and we don't have much time today, so carry on.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's always good to stay in my hometown. So I was just down the street from you last night. So that was good because I only brought one shirt so I could use my parents' washer and dryer real quick. So Rob Krieger, Executive Director of the Energy Authority. I will be brief. Looking at this bill and as Brian mentioned, some of the things we already have in place. I don't want to say it's not necessary because we heard yesterday the need for investment in transmission and the likes from our utilities. My suggestion would be that we do have some tools already in place, say our bonding authority as the Energy Authority transmission is explicitly called out. That bonding authority is up to $3 billion. Granted, it hasn't really been used. I will say that. The Infrastructure Authority, before we were created, did use it once with Basin Electric for a smaller line that did work out quite well. And then the Energy Dominance Fund, it also calls out, baseload energy development and deployment and grid innovations. I think that's broad enough where you could maybe argue a transmission project could be eligible for that. So Brian went through the bill well. I think one thing we should think about too is the cost of all this. So just for kind of ballpark numbers, when you look at high voltage lines now, depending on the geography, a per mile cost can be anywhere from $1.5 million to $6.5 million a mile for a transmission line. So when we think about the Energy Dominance Fund, say that's $105 million, right? If we're looking for Senator Rothfuss, I think of the situation your community's in, we're talking $250 million to get a line into Laramie. So the numbers are quite large that we would need to really do. So I think this whole discussion really yesterday was really good around what we need to do with our power in the state and how we can address this. So I'm not saying there's not a need for this. I think my suggestion would be if you all chose to have us as the Energy Authority implement something like this, my request would be maybe you either amend pieces of the dominance fund to make it more clear that these sort of things are eligible or that you would like these to be done, or that and I know Mr. Bager last meeting talked about maybe tweaking part of our bonding authority to make that work a little better and call some things out. That would be my suggestion. I just, as an 8-person team, another program gets a little much to start implementing. So those were really my remarks today, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to answer any questions. To kind of backtrack just real quick to Mr. Representative Riggins' question about what other states are doing as it relates to energy versus, say, economic development and commerce. It really varies based on your energy producing states versus not. And I kind of laid this out last time, but you look at Texas and North Dakota, they do have very large energy funds that they've put together over the years from various means, whether that's shaving off some severance taxes or whatnot, to kind of build a pretty large corpus that can go into specific projects. Maybe that is a big transmission project. Maybe that is a big pipeline spur for EOR, whatever it may be. So it really varies based on, are you producing the energy or consuming it? So just wanted to answer that.
Questions? Yes. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Krager, thank you for being here. Appreciate you staying over and accommodating our late schedule last night. As I read through the Energy Dominance Fund, and I thank you for your frankness about the tools you already have, but the paragraph in the Energy Dominance Fund, it states that it's for projects related to Wyoming energy needs. So in my mind, that includes transmission lines associated with energy needs. Do you interpret that the same way that you have? Even if we don't amend it or change it, you have that ability to provide a loan or a grant for a transmission line through the Energy Dominance Fund, Senate File 123?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Heiner, I do. I think when you read that, especially pairing it with the language later on that talks about baseload energy development, deployment, those sort of things, I do think there's an argument that it is eligible.
Okay, follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
And Mr. Krager, the bonding that you have, did you say it was $3 billion bonding authority?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Heiner, up to $3 billion.
So, and has that been utilized very much?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Heiner, not since the WEA was formed. I'll just read you what the bonding says. That we can issue revenue bonds, quote, to finance energy transmission facilities and related infrastructure, pipeline, and other transportation and distribution projects. As I mentioned, we've done one of these that we collect the fees. And again, this is done under the Infrastructure Authority, which I don't want to put Mr. Baker on the spot, but he was the director at the time. And it was for a smaller line, and that did work out. I think, frankly, with some of the other programs that we've had to date, they've just been more attractive to the companies than maybe the bonding authority has been. But that's not to say we couldn't, critique some things there and try to push folks to that if they're looking at building out these larger projects. Because again, I personally would be a little uncomfortable, right? If it's a one transmission project, ask for the entirety of the energy dominance fund, right? That puts me in quite a pickle to figure out how to do it. So probably try to push them towards the bonding authority.
Okay, one more and then I'll shut up. Is that okay,
Props.
Mr. Chairman? Yes.
Chairman?
Mr. Krager, I've talked to a few utilities and what they've conveyed to me is they're not capital constrained right now. And in the room, we don't have a lot of participation from the utilities for this subject matter. Have you had any utilities approach you about needing some bonding, some loans or grants for transmission lines particularly?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Heiner, that's a great question. Early on, we did have some discussions with one of our largest utility actually about our bonding authority and should that work. Since then, we have not. There has not been any applications to the energy matching fund before related to that. And we have opened the energy dominance fund. I know it doesn't take effect technically till July 1st, but first applications are due. So that's open and ready for companies to apply, and we don't have any for that.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, back to the bonds for just a second. Can you tell me what the cost of those bonds are and why they haven't been utilized? Is it due to cost or are there other complications that keep those bonds from being utilized?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, it's kind of tough to answer. So we, when the Energy Authority was formed, we were a little smaller than we are today. And as I mentioned, there was other programs that were kind of tasked, even before the energy matching funds, there were separate, programs for the Upton project up in the Rare Element Resource Project that came out of a different fund. So we didn't really have the capacity to focus on all of those plus the bonding authority. Now that we are stood up, we have an investments director and those sort of things, we kind of have that capacity. So the costs and those sort of things, we just haven't done one. So I don't really have a good answer for you today. I will say it goes through the treasurer's office is really where those funds are borrowed from. The one that we did do, again, back under the Infrastructure Authority was about $35 million. I think the interest rate was just under 4.7 and it paid back, it was early, the payback, and I think we made about 600,000 that we reverted to the general fund for that. But that was years ago.
Other questions?
Follow up real quick.
Oh, follow up? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, would these loans be actual loans, or are we just going to guarantee the loans? Or is there a better way to do this than?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, the way I read this bill draft is they're good old fashioned loans. They're not anything different. I would say the dominance fund is also the same. The interest rate on the dominance fund is a bit lower than what's called out in this bill currently. Same with the dominance fund. We're going to go through a financial institution in the state to work on that, to help underwrite, contract those sort of things out. But yeah, I just see them as regular loans, low interest.
Do you, you're saying the cost per mile is pretty high. Should we up our money in this bill to accommodate that, or does the utility look for this bill to cover all the costs of a line or just part of the cost of a line?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I would be hesitant on upping the amount in this bill just because to Chairman Heiner's question, what is that demand? I just haven't seen that yet from my purview for these sort of projects. But yes, you're right. They're expensive. So like I said, it's $1.5 to $6.5 million a mile for these high voltage lines. So I don't know. I just haven't seen the demand. So it's kind of tough to answer some of these because like I said earlier, if we do have someone come forward, there is a good chance it's a sizable amount that would, I would guess would max out the 50 million as written in this bill.
Other questions? Yes, Representative Riggins.
Thanks, Mr. Co-Chairman. Do all electricity distributors benefit from a major transmission line project, or is it just limited to the service area of that particular utility? I mean, it's a little bit different. I know there was discussion about choice electricity, and I'm familiar with choice gas. You know, it's the same gas, right? So I didn't know if there was any agreements. I know probably among different generators, they could be applied to that, but I didn't know about how it would affect service areas if they're the main beneficiary of a transmission line.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, I would defer that a little bit to my friends at the PSC. I do believe there's agreements to where if you have a line running through, say, Rockies, well, Laramie is a pretty good example, right? It's islanded and still in Rocky Mountain Power's service territory. So I think there are deals to, jump on other people's lines, send your electrons through, but I'd look to the PSC on the particulars on that. Right.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Krieger.
Thank you.
Thank you for being brief. Is there any public comment on this bill? LSO 24. Is there anybody online for LSO 24? None? Okay, we'll close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Yes. Larson.
I'm not sure I'll move the bill, but a thought is rather than making it an energy transmission loan program, we could do an energy availability loan program where we see issues of these like coal-fired power plants not being able to get financing because of ESG or whatever. That could be an option to allow the state to loan for coal-fired power plants. Try to open it up that way if we decided that we wanted to move this forward. But I don't think I'm ready to make a motion, but just for discussion purposes, wanted to mention that.
But you're moving the bill? No? Okay. Anybody else like to move the bill? This is our attempt to show that we are supporting energy transmission in Wyoming. But as we've heard, there are other options for our energy transmission lines also. But this would show that this group is willing to do this. But I'm sure getting some blank stares.
You want me to stand in, please?
No. This LSO 24 is going to die for lack of a motion. All right, moving on. Well, we took care of that. Yeah. All right, moving right on to the subject of the day, Wyoming Business Council. We got follow-up information from the Business Council. Josh?
Chairman Anderson, members of the committee, thanks for having us today. I have on your left, my right, I have Derek Smith, who's the co-chair of our board, and on your right, my left, I have Sarah Fitzgerald, who's our chief strategy officer. My name is Josh Durrell. I'm the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. Thanks for having us today. As the gentleman passes out the information that we're going to go through, these are just a few slides to kind of frame us up for today. But I was hoping to do that before we take a deep dive into all of the information that we've provided, because I think it helps us understand at a really high level the things that we do within the state and the challenge that our families face in this state. And so before we dive into the data, which I sure like a lot, but it turns out that even though that data represents what's going on, it doesn't really talk about what's happening in our communities. And so I want you to think about your family or the families of those folks that you represent for a minute. And I want you to think about the challenges that they have, the opportunities that they have, the excitement and the love that they might have for Wyoming as we talk about economic development, because it definitely goes beyond structure and it goes beyond I guess maybe even policy and investments for a minute. I also want you to think about the optimism that you should have after these first few slides, because I think there's a really exciting time ahead of us in Wyoming. I think there is a lot of opportunity, and it's not just born out from optimism and thoughts and feelings. It's born out in the data. And so I want to just, if you could turn to the second page after the title page there, if you could understand the challenge that Wyoming faces, but also the entire nation faces a challenge where, look, when you go to the pump, things cost more. It costs a lot more to drive around this big old state. It turns out that groceries have gone up a whole lot also. So those are things that America is facing, but Wyoming, it feels it pretty acutely because of that bottom line, and that's that median household income. It has stayed relatively flat while the costs that our families endure is much higher. And so I just want to frame that up because that is a challenge that we face. And it's a challenge that at the Wyoming Business Council, we like to take on head on, because it turns out that that's really what our job is to either create a smaller gap there or have no gap at all, and maybe even have it where, what if our income climbed faster than those things? That would be prosperity. That would be margin. That would be getting people to a spot where they could think about investing in their own communities, investing in themselves. And so as we take the next step, this is a way to reduce that problem or get rid of that problem. And that is by making investments in communities that want to invest in themselves, of course, but making investments in our communities makes a difference. So this graph that you see on page 3, where it says the Business Council makes a difference, this is a comparison of 3 counties in the state. And the top line, that green line, is a county that happens to be north of us, and right now here as we sit in Casper. And about a decade ago, engaged in some really strong visioning. They engaged in some planning. They made some really hard decisions about what to do about growth, because they were going to be experiencing a challenge as one of the coal mines that many of their residents worked in was declining. And they made those investments. They made that planning effort. They made hard decisions. And the Business Council was there to make investments in things like business parks and business recruiting that changed the outcome of their future. And so if you look at it, their jobs and their wages, and this comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, has grown over the last decade. In those other counties that are shown below, those counties have not made those investments and have stayed relatively flat. And what we want to show here is that we don't just have to try to reduce gas prices and groceries. That'd be great, or property taxes. We should also take a look at how do we invest in ourselves so that our wages go up, the job opportunities increase. How do we do that? Well, economic development is how you do that. Investments through the Wyoming Business Council and other entities that are doing this same type of thing. You saw from Director Krieger, they're doing a lot of economic development as well. We work very closely together on those projects. When we invest, we can make a difference in that median income and the number of jobs that are available in those communities. If we jump to the next slide, you'll see some very specific examples of this occurring. In that top left, you'll see the construction that is going to be Mesa's headquarters, or excuse me, their manufacturing headquarters just down the road from this building. And that is an opportunity that could have gone elsewhere. They have locations all over the United States. They have a very good presence in the Front Range. This manufacturing could be going on there, but Wyoming decided to invest, and they invested alongside us. If you move to the top right there, you'll see two gentlemen from the company called DISA, who started out as really just an idea. Some technology that was developed at the University of Wyoming. It then continued to grow through things like Kickstart and investments from the state, but also a lot of private investment to make that happen. And now they're off and running and building something really, really big for the nation, maybe even the world. As we move down, you'll see a group of folks who are starting about the kind of the same path that DISA was on maybe, but just at an earlier stage. And then of course, there's that, the picture with the pheasant hunting there, and that's our friends from Weatherby, and that is a recruiting success. But there are a whole lot of others that you will see in this packet of information that we provided. So, you know, there is opportunity in Wyoming. And with all of these companies and the more that they represent, these are folks that are making an investment in Wyoming. They're making a go of it in Wyoming, and they're choosing Wyoming over other places. Let's jump to the next slide here. This is where I'm really optimistic. This is where I think there is a great opportunity for Wyoming. What this demonstrates is that in the green bar there, you'll see the investment that the state has made, whether it be state funds or even federal funds. Those small investments have leveraged enormous investment by the private side of the world. So if you could imagine, the state has put in, excuse me, the Wyoming Business Council, much of that is through the federal fund. So most of that is federal funds. We've invested about $50 million, $40 to $50 million. And what has returned is the private side of the world has invested about $250 million. And so what I want everybody to remember and think about is that private business wants to work with Wyoming. Private business wants to be here. There is an enormous amount of opportunity. And this is a small amount compared to the greater amounts that are out there. And so private business wants to invest in us. And I think the question that we're trying to answer with all of this work that we've done and all of the things that you're asking about is, does Wyoming want to invest in itself? Because if we invest in ourselves, private business will not just follow along, they'll multiply it. And so the question that we should be asking as we review these programs or contemplate new ones is, are we willing to invest in ourselves? I think the answer is yes. Now, some signals have said that that's maybe not the case, if you were around, which all of you were a few months ago. However, I think there's a new way of looking at it. And I think people are waking up to the fact that we can invest in ourselves. We have the ability to do it. And I think we have the willingness to do it. We definitely have the means. So with that, as we look at all of these programs or talk about new programs that we might think about and policies that we might enact, let's remember, are we willing to invest in ourselves to unlock that private investment? And do we have as much confidence in ourselves as private business has in us? Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm happy to walk through any of this information that we compiled about our programs and talk about next steps so that we can, perform at a very high level and make this possible in not just 1 or 2 counties, but across the state.
All right, very good. Very good. Thank you. Any questions for Business Council? Any questions for the Business Council? Yes. Representative Tarver.
Mr. Rell, thank you for that presentation. And I was just seeing the correlation here, the time frame. And of course, I think we all know what the time frame represents. Basically inflation.
Mhm.
So being a small business owner, we've got way more problems than just getting some money out of the state. Regulation, and you've mentioned this in the past. And so my costs have almost doubled, my employees' costs, insurance costs, operation costs. I don't know how this is going to help us, even if you get more of us out there. We're getting strangled. Our profit margins are shrinking. And I think you touched on this. Regulation's killing us. Insurance companies are killing us. We are so overregulated now. It's incredible. And are you guys focused at all in looking at maybe how to help deregulate? And I think if you just unburden us, you're going to see the private sector explode. That's what's crippling us and my constituents that I work with. We're just regulated to pieces, and every year it just increases. We never think about in this body how to reduce. We just want to add to fix the problems that the current administration has already caused. We never want to subtract. Is this something you guys are looking at hard? And thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Tarver, I'm glad you mentioned that. And you're exactly right. First of all, what you're explaining is that it is not just a simple silver bullet solution where if we throw money at the problem, it's going to go away. One of the things that we've been working on over the last few years is really digging into not just what is the money that can be used to do that. That's just a good indicator of what is possible. We're really digging into the problem and finding that, yes, overregulation is a challenge for businesses. We have been digging into it specifically with local communities and trying to help at the local level, especially around housing, because employers say that housing is a challenge for them to grow their businesses because they can't find places for their teams to live, right? So those people leave. And so what we're finding is that at the local level, we're working closely to reduce regulation. In fact, we have a project coming before SLIB next week. I hope all of you watch that, because what I want you to see is how a community has taken it upon themselves to come up with some ways to make themselves developer friendly. And I think that is a model to look at. So we are working at the state level to help the locals with what regulations are needed, what are maybe just carryovers, or what don't solve the Wyoming problem. So you're exactly right. And what I would say is, as the Business Council, we are known, and we just talked about, as an example, money. People think, oh, it's about funding. Most of our work is not. It is about understanding the really nuanced issues within the problem and solving it. And you're right on the money. Regulation is a big challenge. And it's not just in housing, it's in insurance, it's in everything that you work on. And so I think there's a big role for us to play there. I hope that we get to continue to do that and maybe even bolster it. It sounds a little weird to say that we probably need to get bigger to reduce, but boy, that's an interesting concept. Maybe we could talk about that more. But I think you're exactly right. And there's a lot, again, there's a great amount of opportunity if we can just get out of our own way.
But I think you're entirely right. If we have more businesses that need insurance, that'll interest more insurance companies to service us. That's one of the problems we have, not just with business, but with personal insurance also. So,
Sir.
but the bigger the pool, the more interest there is from insurance companies. So
Mr. Chairman, if I might really quickly just follow along, I think that hopefully is one of the things that you all saw in this packet of information. There are a whole lot of programs that have been like added on. And I think what we want to, and we would encourage this body to really look at, is how do we take some of these things away that are not that effective? And hopefully this demonstrates what's not, so that we can be, really effective at the things that do work and have the flexibility to shed programs over time that don't work. Because I think you're exactly right. We just end up carrying more around and it makes us slower. Yep. Yes, sir. Thank you.
other questions? Representative Riggins, I shouldn't even have to look.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned housing as being a workforce shortage issue. So if that's the case, do you find that employers are looking for ways to provide that housing and create their own developments where they can encourage and then get workforce workers moving here, at least on a temporary basis, because that's frequently the case until the other half decides if she wants to stay here for any longer, right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, we do see some of that. We absolutely do. Again, this is not a problem where there's going to be one answer where regulations go away and all of a sudden magical things happen. I think it's going to take more. We did a webinar just I think it might have been just this week, actually, and 150 people showed up at that webinar. It was all about housing. And one of the panelists was a gentleman who has a business here in town, in the state, multiple locations, and they are looking at how do we help create housing? How do we help fund our own housing so that we can have employees? They're working on this problem as well. So we see a lot of that happening, but it's going to take all of us kind of pulling together. You're right. It's going to take some innovation. I think business definitely likes to innovate and they're good at it. And so we should work alongside them. And again, maybe reducing regulations is one way to get out of the way of business taking a hold of this. So we see it. We want to encourage it. And then, more than anything, get the word out there to others as to what is working. And I think that webinar was one of the ways to do that.
And if I may follow on, I think one of the things we see, and I'm kind of just using some anecdotes from Representative Tarver and I's neck of the woods, we've seen multiple companies that they're not necessarily at the size to be able to provide a housing option. But if we can work to bring multiple of those employers that are having the same problem in a community to the table together to work with the folks like we had on the housing call earlier this week. Again, it's that same concept of the insurance pool. If we can bring more people together, we've got a lot of these smaller companies. Let's say a communications company can't afford to do housing development for the 3 people that they need to hire, but you combine that with the energy company that may need to bring in 3 or 4, find a couple more of those, and all of a sudden you've got a small subdivision worth of homes. So really how do we bring people, how do we connect people and put those resources together towards a solution?
Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks. To follow up on this concept, though, when you look at it from industry's perspective, unless they're a housing development industry, they don't want to develop housing. So when they're looking at siting, they think, well, that's annoying. I'll go someplace that already has housing. And so I just can't imagine that our solution is, or needs to rely on connecting, as you suggested, which I appreciate as being a good option. But I feel like we need to do a lot more as the legislature, because this is an area where the private sector is just going to look elsewhere because that is the easy solution. It is the least cost solution. They don't have time to figure out how to build homes. There are home starts on the Front Range, and it's just easier to go down I-25. So I guess I'll ask you, what should we be doing differently? And what can you do at a different level where we're not putting the onus on industry that wants to come to the state of Wyoming. We're solving the problem because that's literally our job. What are your thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, I'm glad you asked that, because that is, we should be enabling. And the way you enable is through some policy. And it would be good to be able to create or remove policy that gets in the way, because regulations are really at the local level, those are a big challenge for developers. The second thing is arterial infrastructure. So what we found in analyzing, not just in housing, but in locating a business here, the arterial infrastructure, so water, sewer, roads, basic infrastructure to start building, it doesn't exist. And so we have to have things like business ready communities, the BRC fund, to be able to help unlock that. Because as you're going to hear later today, our communities and our counties are definitely resource constrained. So those two things, reducing regulations, increasing arterial infrastructure, are two ways. There are other challenges that we may be able to address, but those are the first two big ones that I would say are really important.
Go ahead.
I think that's an excellent point. The idea of availability of affordable capital to do these projects. You know, we just, and I voted against it too, or didn't move it. We just talked about a bill of $200 million for infrastructure for power. And part of the reason why I had no interest in moving it was that wasn't anywhere near enough money to do anything with power. And we have better processes in place. Seems to me that if there were $200 million available with those terms for infrastructure that can actually be used directly for a housing development project, so by the developer at those terms, that would potentially be snapped up, because relative to the 7%, 8% that they might be paying, that could be incentivizing. So is that something else we can be looking at, is trying to bring some capital at a low expense to the development market in Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing I would like to mention, we're talking about housing right now and the infrastructure to unlock housing. It's no different for the infrastructure to unlock industrial development or business development in a business park or an industrial park. And so one of the ways that we look at everything is through a business lens. So the topic is housing, but we don't want to become some sort of housing authority. We want to solve business problems. It just happens to be that today. So yes, the answer is, could more funds make a difference in more communities? Absolutely. And unlock that growth? No doubt.
Mr. Chairman,
What follow-up, yeah?
well, along those lines, sometimes loans work, sometimes they don't work, sometimes grants work. And we have loan programs that don't work because they're in spaces where loans don't work. The grants are always loved. No one's ever going to say no to a grant, but it doesn't always need to be a grant. And this is something, as we're looking at the catalog of services, you know, maybe that's another area where we can just get a more detailed feedback of what are circumstances where we really need to be focused on loans because because they are sufficient and a low cost of capital through the loan will work. Again, for example, a housing development, if we could provide loan for a housing development to the actual developer in some way where they were getting a lower cost of capital, we might be able to draw them up and incentivize development of that. But getting back to the infrastructure that goes to that housing development, a loan's probably not going to get us there. That's probably going to be something that needs a grant. I think that would be incredibly valuable to understand better and to maybe do a review. That'll change over time as well. It all depends on what our loans rates are at and where communities are at. But I appreciate that thoughtfulness and again, maybe as we move forward, getting into those nuances as we reflect on the program catalog that you're providing would be helpful.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, if I might talk a little bit about that, because what you're asking for is what you're describing is the challenge that we see, which is legislation or policy gets created at one point in time to solve a problem that's probably actually a little bit old frankly. And then we're looking into the future and saying, how do we solve this with the tools we have? And, we've squeezed this lemon pretty hard, and we've gotten it down to a spot where we're using these tools effectively. However, what I would say is, as we craft legislation, as we craft policy for the Business Council to solve these problems that are rapidly changing, probably at a pace faster than we're able to move legislatively, build in flexibility so that we have the ability to do grants when they're appropriate, to do loans when they make sense, and make sure that the legislation is not so tight that we can't maneuver, because the challenges that we see today are not the same as they're going to be in 10 years. And we want to be able to move at pace, or have that flexibility to solve the exact problem. So again, I think your point is well taken. And I think that if we can have that flexibility within the programs, then we can solve a lot more problems in the moment. We definitely have no problem with transparency. We have no problem with reporting back and showing what works and what doesn't. In our minds, that will help us craft better policy.
Mr. Chairman, one more.
Sure.
One more for now.
Okay.
Yeah, believe me. What about, reflecting on asset ownership, where in the past we have had assets that the state owned, and then often we have ended up selling off those assets. The state recoups the underlying investment typically, and then the development folks will take any profit or anything along those lines, and we've got a division there. Is that still an effective model? Are we still seeing that as attractive? Because I do think setting up a revolving fund there and trying to add more money to that revolving fund, right? That's not, that's recoupable by the state. And so I think that's attractive. It's acting like a loan, but perhaps more powerful. Is that something that we're still seeing as attractive? I actually can't think of any recent projects, honestly. All the ones I'm thinking of are probably a decade ago. Can you provide a little thought on that?
Sir, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, that idea that we not just expend money for a project and then sort of walk away, that is something that we really work hard not to do. So our job is to invest in a community and then have that money actually stay in the community and work over and over again. As you mentioned, revolving loan is one way to look at that. We look at it as, how do we build the local resources and capacity so that they have the means to do those projects again, and eventually do them on their own without state level investment. So that is a very good model. I think it's one we should lean into, and it's one that is working in those places where they've had enough projects to create a critical mass.
Thank you.
No more questions?
I said one more. So,
Representative Riggins, I'm not even going to look.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what role is local planning and zoning having an effect on this? Is it significant, insignificant? I know, we adopted the fast track permitting process to help this along. So do you think that's a major problem in how this is unfolding?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, what I will say is it is definitely impacting it. It varies across the communities, across the state. I can't say exactly whether it's a giant problem or if it is because in some places it might be, in some places it's not. There are places that have little to no zoning in the state, and there are places where it's really, really challenging to get a building permit or to get an inspection done. I don't necessarily know the exact causes of each of those, so that would take a little more investigation, but it's definitely a challenge, but it's also not a simple solution. So, sorry for not being able to give you a good answer on that.
Representative Heiner.
It's been 10 minutes. Can I speak again now?
Your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Durrell, back in April at our meeting, one of the presentations you gave was a full page of programs that have been put on your plate as the Wyoming Business Council over the past 20 years. Just we're always adding things to that plate. We seldom take anything off.
And one of the requests that we had is that you look at those programs and let us know which ones are not very effective anymore. And maybe we can unload some of that from your plate so you can focus on the ones that are effective. Have you been able to come up with some of those that we may be able to take off to give you less pressure so you can focus on those things that work?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. Yes, sir. In fact, within and it's a lot of information. So, and we could probably summarize it and pull it to the top so that there's just a list of sort of like high likelihood of removal or something like that, remove these first. But within that, couple hundred pages of all of our programs, there's recommendations on which we should keep, which we should add to, which we should remove. And when we're more than happy to sort of summarize that list and make it really easy so that we can do that. We've also taken a look at the statute because the statute is a great place to remove some of those and provide that focus. And so we've provided a little bit of redlining to that as well. And we're happy to dive into the particulars at any time. But we absolutely think that focus is important. I will say it's funny. Somebody said to us, "Oh, well, gosh, it just seems like you guys have so many people and so many things." And I think to myself, yeah, well, about 10 years ago, we had almost double the people at the Business Council. And so that's changed dramatically. And the focus has changed, and the resources have we run it like a business. So if you have fewer resources, you focus in on the places that work the most, and we're going to keep doing that. But we would definitely love some help cleaning some of these things up.
And Mr. Chairman, a lot of times what impedes business are government regulations. And sometimes that gets in the way of the small business of your Wyoming Business Council. After 20 some odd years, there's some things in there that should have sunset that you've still got on your plate. You're trying to do it all, but let's try and get government out of the way so you guys can be successful. Let's narrow the focus a little bit and clean up the statute. That's what we're here about, is empowering you to be successful and getting government regulations out of the way so you can do that. So I would appreciate to see if you could provide that to this committee. We would like to act upon that and help you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, yes, sir. And the irony of the government regulations slowing down a government entity is it's thick, isn't it?
Well, that'd be a good thing to bring back for the next meeting that we're going to have in Cheyenne.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
And I just would like to echo from a board perspective, Representative Chairman Heiner. We also would like to continue that dialogue from a board perspective. When we look at this, it has been far too long since there have been able to be regulatory changes for the agency. I'm excited about, maybe it's the wrong word choice, but to sit in front of you and have this discussion around how can we change, how can we improve, and really look forward to this being a continuing dialogue with the Minerals Committee, not just when we have to put a large focus on it, but rather coming back yearly or bi-yearly and going, this is what works, this is what doesn't, and these are the changes we'd like your help with making.
Representative Lawley.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I mean, looking over this, and I would love a sort of executive summary of this where you tell us each of the agencies list and your recommendation. The background is really helpful and good. It's not one versus the other. It's that would help us go process more quickly. So, and just give you an example of why I think that's important is on page 24 of this handout concerning Wyoming Business Council programs and service catalog. We were just talking about workforce housing, and it looks like you're recommending remove from the Wyoming Business Council statute.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, we just had a big discussion, but I don't know, I didn't have to go to the restroom a minute, but I don't recall that being mentioned, that your recommendation is to take that out of the statute for Wyoming Business Council. I don't know what your alternative is, but this is kind of why the summary would have been really important. As topics come up, we could look and see if you have something already on that and what your recommendations are, just to give insight into how we can use the information effectively in the time constraints we have.
Yeah.
But I'm so curious about I mean, we've identified this is really important. Where should it go? How should we approach it? That's one of my questions, but if you can answer that, I have a follow-up with something similar.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, that's a perfect example of what Senator Rothfuss and I were discussing about providing flexibility within the legislation so that we can approach a problem that is immediate. And so at one point, there was a workforce housing component to our statute. This particular program is unfunded right now. And so it is essentially, in some ways, useless. However, the Business Ready Communities program, because it is much more broad and flexible, we actually handle it with the Business Ready Communities program. So any specifics that the workforce housing allows us to do, that's handled by the Business Ready Communities program. And I think that that's a really good model for us to understand. If we write legislation that is very specific to a problem that, again, was probably yesterday, not even today, how do we make sure that we deal with it over time? Well, that's a whole lot of extra work for a body that should be focusing on the future. And so getting rid of this in statute doesn't stop us from handling workforce housing with our Business Ready Communities program. It just cleans it up so that we don't have all of these sort of like legs hanging off of the body. And so what I would say is this is a really good example of the legislature being very specific about a problem, and then it doesn't get funded. So it's really kind of useless, and we're just carrying around statutory language. So instead of having a program like workforce housing or regulation reduction, if we have more flexibility, then we can approach the problems as they exist. So this particular program, we should sunset and get rid of it and just use the Business Ready Communities program, which is funded and should continue to be funded so that we can solve those problems. Does that help answer your question?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you. It does to a certain degree, because it says in there specifically to take it out of the statute.
Mm-hmm.
So again, what authority do you operate under in the area of housing by doing it that way? I'm confused. And again, we've had a long discussion as if it's something you're going to have sort of general oversight of, but maybe I'm missing something about that you're not based on this recommendation. I think that's what that's telling me. So this is where I think it's a good example of a lot of confusion that seems to exist. You clearly have a lot of things that have been put on your plate. I would like to see some of them gone because I'm concerned about what's not on your plate, apparently, which is more this idea of focusing with what we know about Wyoming, where the assets are, what the community needs are, what the different places in Wyoming that need economic development, but from the outside, bringing folks in, being that, again, welcoming mat to the state, some people have called it. Where is the effort towards that then it isn't just servicing existing programs, it's about servicing the states and the people, the communities. And I'm not seeing that, but here housing is a good example. So we're really like a lot of confusion now. Like, did we need to spend so much time on housing if we were just going to kind of go through this first and okay, well, let's just consider that in Business Ready, but not overall about the role of the Wyoming Business Council overall. And maybe it should be somewhere else. I'm not sure what the answer to that question is, but you perhaps have a good idea. But some of this does kind of, for me, say restructuring of really the executive branch, which isn't necessarily my business so much, but I'm just saying how some things are done and where there seems to be blank spaces and what I would commonly think you would be spending a lot of time on. And servicing these programs is important, but if you're not doing the other, these programs just sort of exist for the sake of existing and filling the fulfillments of a particular program that doesn't help communities like mine in my district, frankly, very much. So thank you. If you have any comments you have on that, but I'm very confused.
Chairman Anderson and Representative Lawley, maybe I could kind of step through those and help with that. I think your question about, workforce housing and carrying statute around and doing all those things, we don't focus on an unfunded mandate. We focus on solving that problem. It happens to be housing today, and it happens to be arterial infrastructure, which is water, sewer, streets. So those things can be covered by the Business Ready Communities program. So we can handle workforce housing without having a very specific and prescribed solution there from the legislature. And so I think that's covered. Let me take a quick stab at your other question about being the front door for Wyoming, as well as helping communities figure out what their assets are. And I'm gonna ask you to turn to page 4 on these pages about business recruitment. We are the front door for Wyoming. We do a lot of those things. In fact, the examples that you see in this are not even examples where we had to utilize state funds to attract those businesses, but we were in the places that they were looking for Wyoming, and then we connected them with communities that could support them. And so it's really important to realize we do recruiting a lot. We're out there all the time looking for businesses who want to come to Wyoming and helping them find homes within Wyoming. And we do that by understanding the assets at a local level and connecting those businesses with places they're going to be successful. So that is happening. We'd love to make that happen more. The other part of it that you mentioned is it's interesting because up in the Bighorn Basin, and I believe Senator Cooper came to this summit, we have a program statewide, but we've been working a lot in the Bighorn Basin with this program called Assessment to Action. And in Assessment to Action, we work with communities over the course of many weeks, not just one session to talk about things, but we work with them over weeks and do homework. The Bighorn Basin has been one of the most active in what's called Assessment to Action, in doing the homework, doing the work, finding out what assets they have, what problems they can solve, and working closely with us, but also their partners to solve them. So much so that they had, I believe it was 6 different communities got together and had a summit to understand what each of them all learned through that process. So that is going on. I don't know the exact page where Assessment to Action is in this, but I think what we always assume is that if it's not in statute, it doesn't happen. But that's not reality, because we do a whole lot of things because we're working to solve that local capacity problem. And so I would be happy to walk you through and connect you with members in those communities in the basin that have done that close to home, so that you could see. But again, that is occurring, and I just don't know the exact page to show you here.
Yes.
94? Page 94 is where that exists.
Okay, thank you for that. And I am aware of those assessments and even the summit that happened. I was in another committee meeting, I think Select Water, when you guys had the more regional one. So, and I appreciate that work and I think it's valuable, but it's really different than what I'm asking, which is about what leads you've given to the small rural communities. And I'm raising this in part because it's been raised by my local economic development people. And the answer that I've gotten from them, or what they presented to me, is we haven't gotten any leads from Wyoming Business Council for years. And so that's, when I say the welcome at, that's what I'm referring to is, I think there is a lot of groundwork done and I think it's valuable. But without leads, it kind of just goes and gets put in a drawer, let's be honest. And it's there, maybe that gets pulled out of the drawer, but I'm not saying there's not some of that being done, but, and I recognize it's a lot easier to recruit to certain other areas, but that focus on some of these places that need the most help in finding and being given leads. And then it does become up to them, honestly, how they manage that lead and what they do and are willing to do. But that, when I say that front doormat, that's what I'm talking about. And that's where my sources come from as far as my area and how that's been non-existent. Maybe for other places in the state, you've done a great job of providing them leads and things. So I'm not saying that because I don't really know. I don't have information on that, but just wanted to raise that. I think these programs are all important in laying groundwork and doing other things, but somehow we're missing the boat in our small rural communities. We really are. And one of the measures has to be, we haven't even been providing leads for them. We haven't found leads for them. And I know they're more difficult to find. I acknowledge that. But that's part of who we are in Wyoming. And part of the welcome mat has to include a focus on those areas, I believe, more fervently. So, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, thank you for that, and thanks for the clarification. And maybe what we could do is sort of go offline and walk through that recruiting process and see if there are ways we can improve it. Thank you.
Other questions for Wyoming Business Council? Representative Riggins. No, I didn't even look. I just knew. Oh,
Today was his day.
yeah, yeah. All right. Good. Thank you. Thank you for the wrap up there. Very good. We appreciate it. And look forward to that information for the next meeting. Good. Thank you. Now we've got some local government perspective. And I know these guys are fast. They really go along fast and don't require a lot of questions because they got a lot of answers. So, Jason, are you up? Oh, good job. And Jeremiah comes right up too.
Multitask.
Yeah, multitask. Double up. You can both talk and get over real quick.
Mr. Chairman, Jason Mager here today on behalf of Wyoming Association of Municipalities for the Director Ashley Harpstreet, who's in Laramie today for their annual meeting. I will make this extremely quick because I am not the point person on this one and am here to mostly kind of take any questions, report back to the association. And Ashley and Jeremiah here have coordinated, and he's prepared to deliver some joint remarks on behalf of the organization. So I'll kick it over to him.
Good job, Jason. Yeah. All right. Way to go. Jeremiah.
Good
if
morning.
you can beat that.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I won't be able to beat that, but I promise you that I will be brief. I don't want to reiterate anything that you heard from the two associations at your last meeting, but I did want to provide some additional context. I had alerted you and your staff that I had not had a chance to engage my board on this particular issue and that I wanted to do that. We recently hosted a meeting, and I, in the course of that, facilitated a conversation with members of my board and county commissioners from across the state. We did that in the presence of the Wyoming Business Council leadership. Appreciate Josh Durrell, CEO, for joining us, and a couple of his staff. We specifically discussed the role of the Business Council and the broader economic development needs of Wyoming's communities, what is working well, where we have gaps, and how state and local partners can better align efforts moving forward. I'll tell you that several consistent themes emerged out of that conversation. Those include that strong local leadership is essential to successful economic development, and that communities understand their unique opportunities, challenges, and priorities. We have many communities across the state that have incredibly strong local leadership working in this area. And you've seen some of the examples that were presented in the data that the CEO put forward to you. We also certainly came to a common theme that local leadership alone is often insufficient. We need, communities need, to have access to resources, technical assistance, and I would really highlight that one as a critical piece of it. Infrastructure investment, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we get into the countywide consensus program. And we need very strategic support to help turn local priorities into successful projects. I do want to emphasize to you, this was a part of the end of our conversation, that our board believes that the Wyoming Business Council serves an important function and remains an important statewide partner for local communities. The question for Wyoming's counties is how can the Wyoming Business Council be structured to better support locally driven economic development while maintaining some statewide coordination and accountability. Some of the key themes that came out of our discussion include, again, that economic development is most effective when local communities have the flexibility to pursue locally identified priorities. Number two, that state programs are designed and support local capacity rather than replacing local decision-making. And we had quite a bit of conversation about this local capacity thing, and I'll certainly be exploring it more with our members. I highlighted this earlier. Infrastructure remains one of the most significant barriers to economic growth in many Wyoming communities. Water, sewer, transportation, broadband, housing-related infrastructure, and community facilities are foundational economic development needs, and we have not invested at the level that we need to over the course of, in particular, the past decade to get where we need. There was also a theme that programs such as the Business Ready Communities grants have provided meaningful benefits in many ways. But counties continue to discuss whether there should be a better balance between more predictable long-term infrastructure investment, and I'll highlight again, countywide consensus, versus competitive project-based funding, which is what many of our statewide programs are focused on. Communities vary, as you know, significantly in size, capacity, and financial resources. And state programs should recognize those differences and provide flexibility where appropriate. We know that there can occasionally be problems when it comes to, I'll just use one example, suggesting that a community has to impose a local option tax in order to qualify for particular grants. That might make sense in some communities. It doesn't in others where a sales and use tax assessment really doesn't generate all that much revenue to help benefit things. And then finally, better alignment between economic development, workforce development, education, and youth retention have to remain critical elements of our success if we're to be successful. I'll just close by saying ultimately our board believes that Wyoming should continue pursuing a collaborative model that combines strong local leadership with effective state partnership. It is not a one-size-fits-all endeavor, and that the state's role should be to provide tools, resources, technical expertise, and infrastructure support that enables local communities to achieve their own goals while advancing broader Wyoming economic interests. I appreciate your continued interest in this topic and taking our input on it. We'll be here for the duration, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Mr. Raymond, there are several economic development groups in cities. Are there any that are countywide that have large counties that they represent?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not as familiar with the economic development landscape as I was at one point in time, but I do think that we have a number of those entities, although they may even have a local community name, they have a broader countywide emphasis for them, and that many of your counties do contribute to them. I know that Park County, it's a collaborative effort between the municipalities and the county as one example. Certainly Cheyenne Leads focuses around Cheyenne, but does have a broader county emphasis as well.
Questions Riggins. No, he has then. Hayner takes his place.
Pinch hit for Representative Riggins. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ryman, thank you for being here. I appreciate your comments, and as wrote down some notes in your conversations, it fell into two key points that I think I caught, but just to verify, you're saying your emphasis for economic development is on strong local leadership, but you lack technical expertise on the local level. And the second one is you need predictable long-term infrastructure needs that are not project-driven. You don't wait for a big economic, some industry to come to your community or county. You need this infrastructure ongoing and not tied to some project. So if those are true, those two summary points that I picked out, could we utilize the Wyoming Business Council for that technical expertise which you're lacking and use the consensus block grants for predictable long-term infrastructure needs that are not tied to a project? Could we make those fit somehow that way?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Heiner, you're hitting on exactly what I think our thought process is here. And I do want to just say that we have gradations of communities and counties across the state. Some of them do have the technical expertise and know-how to pursue these efforts. Others, for whatever reason, just have lacked the resources perhaps to pursue that and do need the support of the Wyoming Business Council in technical areas. And certainly that would be an emphasis that I would bring to you. You are correct about the countywide consensus program. We'd see that as a critical, perhaps the most critical element of trying to break down some of the barriers for communities to make that evolution. And so investment there will be highly critical. I do want to stop short of saying we don't need the Business Ready Communities program in some iteration. Perhaps it's completely revised and we might come back to you with that very recommendation. But as communities do build along this pathway with the investment that we hope you will be able to bring with countywide consensus, there are going to be those projects, whether that's a local, just need to make it family ready project, or trying to attract that industry that you're trying to pursue that might take resources that are beyond the capabilities that the that the countywide consensus program alone might provide. So I suggested to the Appropriations Committee there should be a backstop of some sort, and we would like to continue working through that. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into countywide consensus.
Representative Lawley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate the work you've done with the county leadership, because this is very similar to what I've been hearing. You know, I have two counties, both are what I would call rural counties, and some of the mismatch that you've described really in approach. Not that some of those types of approaches can't be effective in certain situations, but sort of an overwhelming amount of things that are competitive in a way that almost makes it extremely difficult for certain rural areas to actually be able to compete at that level without other pathways, which I've suggested before. Why not? Isn't there a different pathway for certain different areas, particularly rural areas in Wyoming, that it's a little bit more of a leveling of the playing field? I understand the reason for that competition, but it's not worked. It's ended up cutting out rural areas from some of the opportunities. And I think you've described that very well, and I appreciate that. So could you talk a little bit more about that discussion that you had with your board about what it looks like? We've got, of course, this consistent block grant. We're going to discuss that. I don't necessarily actually repeat things for that, but I want to kind of get a good flavor for what that would look like in their minds to make it more beneficial to local communities, what's offered and the way it's offered through the Wyoming Business Council.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, if I could, I don't want to suggest to you that the Business Ready Community Program hasn't provided some necessary and beneficial support to some of our rural communities. I probably would be prodded by the mayor of Shoshone right now, who has found great success in using that program and sees visions for how it can help transform their community. We heard from Bighorn County as one of the examples in the discussion that we hosted recently that they came with the perspective of establishing an industrial park to recruit from or bring outside parties into that industrial park. What they found the success to be was actually recruiting some of their local businesses into that industrial park so that they could expand and grow in a way that they weren't able to in their former tenant areas. So it has provided some support, but what we can't get from a program like that I think all of our communities, and particularly our rural and underfunded communities, is a steady stream of funding that allows for infrastructure development on a continuous basis so that you are family ready and have that opportunity to take that next leap when the time is right.
Yeah. Follow up?
Sure.
Thank you. I wasn't really just referring to the Business Ready community grants, because I agree with you that I'm really speaking more broadly to some of the other programs in the Wyoming Business Council, which I do think does good work. I think it's very necessary to Wyoming, but I also think refocus is really important, which is why we're here. So I wasn't speaking to that particular program specifically, but to overall the way we look at opportunities that are offered through some of these various programs and how they've been developed in rulemaking, et cetera, whether or not there's a better way to fit particularly for more rural areas.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize if I tried to suggest that that's sort of the key focus. It's the one that I'm most familiar working around right now. So I don't know that I have a ton of other examples for you out of the conversation that would point, but getting more deliberate, more structured and broad local education and technical assistance is really one of the key critical areas that I heard out of it, out of the broader conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Ryman. Would you say that with this grant program that there's a 25% match requirement in that? Have you seen in your observation that this is a hindrance or obstruction to some of these smaller communities that have been affected by some of these larger projects? Have you seen that as a impediment to some of these smaller outfits? Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Campbell, I believe you're talking about the new 25% requirement under the Business Ready Communities program, and I think they've renamed it slightly as well. I think it's such a new requirement that I don't know that I'm prepared to answer that, but I will say that the feedback that I provided independent in that process was a concern that by now establishing a firm requirement, you might leave out some communities that don't have the base resources to be able to pursue providing that match. And many of those are going to be our rural communities. are lesser funded communities and their ability to do that. They just don't have the taxing capacity in some instances as well to even pursue that if they wanted to. So I am concerned over the long term, if that provision remains in place, that it will not be beneficial for many of our communities, and they'll bypass it or just won't take advantage of it, won't get the opportunity to participate.
You bet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir. It's kind of with that in mind that I'm wondering, because you were talking about different options. And one of the things that I've been looking at is perhaps splitting that program to where half of it remains as it is current, but take that other half and turn that into low interest loans. Because under the there's no qualifier for a loan, so to speak, in the fact that if a large project was to be dropped on a small community, it would be advantageous to be able to receive immediate funding through a low interest loan for these little communities, as opposed to have to coming up with a 25% match for those same grant qualifications. Do you see any advantage to having diversity in that?
Mr. Chairman, again, I'm not invested in understanding those programs intimately in the way that I used to in my career, but maybe, but it's also my understanding that those programs already have the capability of either a grant track or a loan track. So that may already exist.
Representative Holly, let's have another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you mentioned a backstop, and I think what I heard is you're going to further develop that, but could you just give some kind of context for that backstop? What would it be trying to do? What is it? How would that work? Because I think I'd like to understand that. I know we may hear more on it later, but.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, and you'll just, I'll just say it now and save it from my later presentation, but there's so much integration amongst several programs that exist right now that's why I say we're going to come back to you with something at a later date. But the concept is that if you are providing countywide consensus funding, you're helping us to bake the cake. Just take care of the cake. Now, some communities, that's exactly where they need to be spending their investment and their time, taking care of, again, that base infrastructure, roads, water, sewer, making sure that they're family-ready communities, so that eventually they can become, business-ready communities and have that growth. So countywide consensus can provide benefits across the landscape. Mineral royalty grant is a good example for maybe some of those communities run into an emergency infrastructure program or issue. City of Rollins right now with the water infrastructure issues. That might be an off-ramp for them to go and get additional resources for that particular emergency. But we have some, again, high-functioning communities that need another off-ramp and have a big opportunity in front of them that it's beyond the capacity of the resources that countywide consensus or their own might provide. And that's where Business Ready Communities program in its future form, or maybe in its existing form, becomes an element to help them do that. And that's not to say that you won't have a community that is, a rural community that is really just trying to take care of that infrastructure, won't have one of those icing on the cake events. They very well, and I hope they do, the Business Ready Communities program would be also available to them.
Thank you. Thank you to the local government team for your input. Thank you very much. All right, we're moving right along to LSO 20. Oh, excuse me.
We can talk offline. I think we're kind of trying to move along.
Why don't you get her after the meeting? We'll be done here by 7 o'clock tonight.
We got to move her along if we're going to make that.
Yeah. Okay, all right. We're going to hear from the LSO overview on this bill, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, 27 LSO 20, you should have draft 0.5 in front of you. This is 9-01 in the online meeting materials, consensus block grant local funding program. So this bill draft would create and codify the consensus block grant program for local government projects. The language is primarily based on language that was used in typically in the budget bill. The specific language from this bill comes from the most recent iteration of that program, which was in the 2014 budget bill. The draft specifies requirements and restrictions for the program and specifies funding for the program. So beginning on page 2, the staff comment just again notes the language is based on that section 316 of the 2014 budget bill. This was the last year the legislature provided funding for the consensus block grant program in this iteration. A couple of other notes. So first, the committee may wish to consider including definitions for terms that are used in this bill draft. I would say primarily the definition of capital project, I'll explain that a little later, and then local government, really to narrow or at least define on what the funds may be expended and the type of local government entity that may be eligible for the funds under this program. And then the committee may also wish to consider if further language or requirements should be added. For example, more language about an application process, the permitted use of these funds, or limits on amounts or distributions. And then just for the committee's reference, I included in the meeting materials the Office of State Lands and Investments, their rules on the program from the budget bill. So that's 9-02 in your meeting materials. And again, I'll highlight a couple of things later, particularly when it comes to the discussion on capital project. So this creates a new chapter of statute in Title IX. Page 2, line 29 just creates the program, and it requires the Office of State Lands and Investments to administer the program. That is the same as the programs that was in the budget bill. Then page 2, line 33. So on and after July 1st of each year, the Office of State Lands and Investments must distribute funds available in the consensus block grant account to local governments. The distribution, I'm on the top of page 3 now, shall be not less than $35 million in total and includes any funds that are specifically appropriated to the account in addition to those that are transferred. And I'll explain a little more about kind of the funding mechanism later, how that works. Where the $35 million comes from, Mr. Chairman, and I'll talk more about this later as well, but the last iteration in the budget bill appropriated $70 million for the fiscal biennium. So the 35 million is just meant to reflect that amount. Of course, that is entirely within the committee's purview to decide not only what the amount of funding should be each year, but also the source of those funds. Then, Mr. Chairman, beginning on page 3, line 9, this describes how these funds are to be allocated to the counties. And I'll just kind of summarize this because it's math heavy. But page 3, line 9 would have 80% of this annual amount going to each county on a pro rata basis based on the county's population. And then on page 3, line 14, and this goes through page 4, line 15, the remaining 20% would go to each county based on an inverse per capita assessed valuation factor. In short, Mr. Chairman, what that means is that 20% would go to the counties that have the least amount of valuation. So really those those revenue challenged counties, a similar concept to the direct distribution to local governments, but slightly different. That formula, like I said, goes through page 4, line 15. Then, Mr. Chairman, page 4, line 17. So funds that are granted to counties under this program shall only be expended for capital projects, including capital projects constructed by special districts. And this is where, and this is a staff comment on the top of page 5, the committee may wish to consider defining capital project, what is or is not a capital project. The OSLI rules defined capital project as the construction, replacement, or improvement of a fixed asset or public service facility and major building and facility repair and replacement. Their definition did not include routine maintenance. But then in turn, the rules define public service facility fairly broadly. So not only including water, sewer, storm drainage, street, road, but also includes things like solid waste disposal, acquiring emergency vehicles, public administration buildings, healthcare facilities, senior citizen centers, jail and detention facilities, facilities for services to the disabled, cost to purchase medical equipment, and other similar facilities as authorized by SLIB. Those are in the rules that were previously promulgated for the old iteration of this program. Then, Mr. Chairman, page 5, line 17, this is kind of where the consensus piece of this comes in. To be eligible for grants, the Board of County Commissioners and the governing bodies of the cities and towns of at least 70% of the incorporated population of the county must certify to OSLI that they have reached agreement on the capital projects for which the grant funds shall be used. Then, Mr. Chairman, the staff comment on the bottom of page 5 that goes into page 6 is just an alternate version of that consensus requirement that just provides a lot more detail into how that process could work. So on page 6, basically it would require at least once every fiscal year the Board of County Commissioners to solicit ideas for capital projects from cities, towns, and special districts. The county can include their requests, and then they have to provide at least one opportunity for public comment to consider that list of proposals. And then they would submit, once reaching that 70% figure, submit their list of capital projects to OSLI. And then OSLI would disperse grant funds to the county treasurer, who would then distribute those grant funds to each county, city, and town and special district based on the list of projects that they submitted to OSLI. And then it just also includes rulemaking. So that's the language on page 6, just an alternate version for the committee's consideration. Then page 7, line 1, just notes that for the purposes of this program, the population for that formula for distributing the funds would be based on the most recent census. Page 7, line 7, just says that nothing in this chapter is construed to limit the governor from making additional budget recommendations for appropriations for capital projects to counties, cities, and towns. Page 7, line 12, authorizes OSLI to consult with the Business Council and other governmental agencies and entities. And once that request for assistance is made, that particular agency must assist OSLI with that assistance or consultation. Page 7, line 21, this is language that was included in the budget bill in 2014, but says that funds that are granted for capital project funding that are in excess of final costs may be applied by the governing bodies using that consensus process to other capital projects. And if excess funds are not sufficient to complete those, then the local governments could hold those funds for projects in a subsequent year as authorized in this bill draft. Then moving on to page 8, line 10, basically would provide that any funds for a future capital project that aren't encumbered in that fiscal biennium do not revert to the consensus block grant account. They would remain with the county, city, or town. Page 8, line 16 is a reporting requirement for the local governments to report to OSLI on the amount of funds received and their application to capital projects. And then in turn on page 9, line 2, that subsection requires OSLI to report to the Joint Appropriations Committee and this committee on the program and the projects funded with the program, as well as any recommendations for legislative changes. Then page 9, Line 21 creates a new section, and this creates a new account, the Consensus Block Grant Account. And the funds in the account would be continuously appropriated to OSLI for grants to counties, cities, and towns and special districts in accordance with this chapter. It requires the state treasurer to invest funds in the account, and the earnings would go back to that account. It also authorizes OSLI to accept any grants, donations, contributions, or other funds specifically for this program. Then page 10, line 11, this is kind of the key figure for the funding, but it would require an automatic transfer from the LSRA to this Consensus Block Grant account on each July 1st of every year in the amount of $35 million. Again, the staff comment on page 10, that figure is well within the committee's purview to decide what that should be. The 70 million per fiscal biennium, though, kind of has two routes, if you will. First, 70 million was the amount of the appropriation in 2014. And then second, it's quite close to the average biennial amount for the program, which was 73.8 million is kind of that average amount. Page 11, line 5 is rulemaking authority, and then a split effective date. The rulemaking is effective immediately. The remaining portions of the bill would take effect July 1st, 2027. With that, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions.
That 35 million per year, isn't that equivalent to 70 for the biennium?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
What's your note telling us?
The note just basically just notes that it is that 70 million per biennium based on the 2014 bill and based on what's pretty close to the average for the program when it was in the early 2000s.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. All right. Question there. Senator Jones.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Fuller, I'm trying to get this right in my head. So does that mean like the per capita amounts, does that mean it would prevent like communities from getting a larger sort of a project going or something like that? How?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Senator Jones. So the amount of the distribution to each county would be based on kind of a split formula. So 80% of the 35 million would go to each county based on their population. And then the remaining 20% is kind of that makeup revenue challenge, if you will, based on the inverse assessed valuation. It's actually, the program is left entirely up to the county and its cities and towns to determine the use of those funds, so long as they're on capital projects, is what the bill says. So whether that means they would fund one big project or 6 smaller projects is left entirely in the discretion of the local government.
Yep. Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Fuller. One of my concerns with this is a lot of these large multi-billion-dollar projects are dropped on smaller communities. The way that I'm seeing this, it's distributed basically off the population, but it doesn't address. I'm looking for something that will specifically address the needs of small communities when they have these large billion-dollar projects put upon them by the state's decisions. Is there any kind of, perhaps, I'm not a lawyer, is there anything in there that provides for that provision in there, sir?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Campbell, I think that concern would be a policy concern that the committee would have to address. But to maybe more directly answer your question, there are 2 pieces in the bill that could potentially be adjusted to address that concern. The first would be the breakdown in the percentage, where the 80% and the 20% for the smaller counties. And then the second would be the level of consensus. So right now it's set at 70% of the county's population has to agree on a project. That could be adjusted to address your concern as well.
I don't think this bill actually takes care of that need that you're talking about. I think that would have to come from another area. This is to put the money to the counties so they can decide where to put it. So any other questions? Oh, yes. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Fuller, this complex formula, all it does is it decides, it calculates how much money would go to the county. And then the beauty of this is the consensus. So then within the county, then you have the consensus between all the communities and the county. And this gives equal representation to all of them. So they decide what their priorities are as a county group. So if they have a small community that needs infrastructure, everyone hopefully will agree upon that, and the money will go to the small community where that need is. So that flexibility is still local control where the money's spent. The complex formula is just to decide how much money goes to the county, and then it's disseminated based on their priorities and not the state's priorities. So this is true local control in its purest sense right here. So is that true, Mr. Fuller?
So Mr. Chairman, Chairman Heiner, correct, the bill draft, two main functions. That formula decides how much money each county gets. And then the second piece of it would be each county, from that pot of money, the funds that they get would decide how they spend it, provided that there's a 70% consensus among the population, between the county and the governing bodies of the cities and towns in that county.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, I just wanted to point out that provision where the counties can hold money over. This is common in the small rural counties. We do it with a lot of things, and that provision is really important too, as far as potentially larger projects where they can save and hold over the money. Very, very important and valuable provision in managing larger projects for counties who the numbers are low on this. I mean, but it's helpful, it's good. And I'm not necessarily proposing a change, although that was an interesting idea about the 80-20 split. But basically you're talking that 20%, the hardship counties, that what we refer to often typically are going to qualify it under that 20% rule of maybe a little more money through that 20% area. So, but that ability to hold the money over from one year to the next is very, very valuable for the rural counties. And that's how they manage the issue Representative Campbell mentioned. So I know that's more of a comment than a question. I can just ask Brian if he has a different view on that, but I think he says no. Well,
Representative Weber, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fuller, my question is to you. I know that this has been done in the past, this consensus grant. Do you have any reasons or talking points or communications as to why this was not successful and why it didn't carry on? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Weber, no specific points other than recognizing that 2016 was a challenging budget year. And so I'm not sure if that legislature made a decision, based on decreased revenues, how to fund that. But that's really the only legislative history I have that predates my time with LSO.
Thank you. No follow-up.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fuller, do you have any idea how utilized this program was when it was in effect? Was it fully utilized?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, I don't have that specific information, but I imagine others in the room may be able to speak to that a bit more.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Roth.
Just to briefly answer that, all grant funds available will always be taken.
Representative Regan's.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my community here is one of the few, or the only one, that all the different towns are all adjacent to one another, immediately touching. So that consensus project process is going to be a little more difficult here, because it's not unusual to have disagreements between the towns and the county commissioners in different directions. And there's no rule. We haven't made establishing any rules regarding that process. But are we going to have suggestions about how that consensus process will work in the county, or is who's going to make that decision on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
And that's my recollection of one of the reasons why the program was deprecated, is that it's politically challenging, and then it goes to a political board for the final decision. So there was a lot of politics involved. That was really the key criticism, but I do think it had more to do with just fund availability, getting rid of it, than the program itself.
Mr. Fuller.
Yep. So Mr. Chairman, just to get back to an earlier question, at least for the last fiscal biennium, so in 2014, so fiscal years 15 and 16, that 70 million was entirely allocated. And I'll send some information that my good colleague, Mr. Richards, prepared for the Joint Appropriations Committee that outlines that, as well as the consensus projects for each county for that fiscal biennium, just to get a flavor of that.
Okay. To answer your question there, Representative Riggins, you might look at page 5 and look at that 70%. That might be, when we're working this, might be a good time to change that. Senator Jones.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So is there a possibility, since these communities don't have to use the funds, is it a possibility that they're just going to collect them and they can never be spent? And then that defeats the purpose.
So Mr. Chairman, Senator Jones, two thoughts. So first, that language on page 5, it says to be eligible for grants, they have to certify to OSLI that they've reached agreement on the capital projects for which the grant funds shall be used. So I think the way I would read that language is they have to present that list to OSLI to be eligible for the grants under this section. Then Mr. Chairman, Senator Jones, I think that language then on pages 7 and 8 that kind of allows that carryover, really, I would read that to be intended to, if project costs come in under the estimation, then those funds could be applied to a different project. But if there aren't enough funds for another project, then they could be carried over to that subsequent fiscal biennium. Or if the project, for whatever reason, they aren't able to encumber those funds for that project in that fiscal biennium, then they could be carried over. But the way I read it would have to be for that capital project.
Yes. Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian, could you tell me where the language on page 6 kind of comes from, the alternate language that's a little bit more detailed about the decision-making process? Where did that come from?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, I'm not sure it really came from anywhere other than just trying to add more detail to that process.
Okay, thank you.
Came from Mr. Fuller. Okay, we got the wrap up on that. Now we're going to have the municipal county team back up. And I'm hoping that Mr. Baker can be just as quick with this.
Mr. Chairman, Jason Baker through Wyoming Associated Municipalities. I will exactly be as quick as that and will turn the joint comments over to Mr. Riemann.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I promise I will likely get to every one of your questions here. First, I want to thank you for taking up this particular topic. It is a really important topic, and I think something that can do a lot of good for, first, again, I've said this a few times, our families in this state and the people that live here, and that we'd love to have opportunities for our children, but also for us to be able to build businesses in a future here. You are taking this up just as the Joint Appropriations Committee is as well. And I hope to be able to share a document with you later today that we've been collectively preparing for them. Today's the deadline to get that to them. I would have provided it to you, but we've been having some back and forth between us and the Association of Municipalities, and I just want to have that completely clean. But it'll go through each of the things that I discuss here this morning. The Joint Appropriations Committee has been very interested in a number of things relative to this program, and I'll just quickly mention the things that I'll go through. First is funding, both the amount and source, eligible uses, the allocation formula, timelines and planning, the population calculations, the consensus threshold, definitions, and program integration. I'll start by just again reiterating the importance of this particular program for local governments to be able to make communities family ready by possessing the necessary public infrastructure to support long-term growth and quality of life. We often hear that infrastructure is the single largest barrier to both community development as well as business retention and expansion. And I've already mentioned some of those infrastructure elements, but we hear this from businesses. It's one of the most critical things that if local government can take care of transportation, water, sewer up front, then business doesn't have to do that. And it's a bit more plug and play, if you will, for them to come in to support families, employees, and again, economic vitality. So jumping into funding amount and source, there are certainly a number of different ways that you could fund this particular program. In the past, it's been entirely funded from the state's general fund. These were biennial appropriations that went into the state budget bill, which is also one of the other elements. This was never codified. It was always an amendment to the state budget. It may be one of the reasons that you ultimately got the Groover memo saying you ought to do some of these things outside of the budget. I don't know, but it also transitioned after that. You certainly could look at funding this from the establishment of a permanent trust fund. I'll talk about that briefly here in a couple of seconds. You could dedicate a portion of state sales and use tax, similar to what you did with direct distribution. You could allocate the funds as you do in this bill from another source like the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account. There are perhaps other options available to you above the cap, mineral royalties, or a dedication of some federal mineral royalties. Those are options that are available to you. What I would tell you is that myself and my colleagues come to you with a request that we increase the funding that is made available through this program. Your bill says 70 for a biennium. We're requesting 75 million per year to move forward. If you look back at the history of the program, your appropriations ranged from $18.7 million in one biennium all the way up to $191 million. So roughly 8 or 9 million a year to over $95 million per year. So our request certainly isn't out of line with that history. And it certainly respects that infrastructure costs have significantly increased over the past decade. And it is in line with your past commitments. I did want to answer the question there was posed was about why did this program not continue? And I'm following the lead of Don Richards, who gave that answer to the Appropriations Committee roughly a month ago. And it really solely came down to, at the time, that was right after the 14 session, was the single largest reduction in state revenues in our history. So there was a choice that had to be made: direct distribution or countywide consensus. And local governments chose direct distribution to continue, which it did for a number of years at the $105 million. So it was entirely a financial decision made at that point in time. I'll get into a little bit about how do we get to consensus a little bit later, but that was not the primary thrust of why the program ultimately went away. Mr. Chairman, just quickly on some of these options, the permanent trust fund is an option available to you. Based on my back of the napkin math, in order to sustain a trust at $75 million per year, you're going to have to put in roughly $1.5 billion to $1.95 billion in order to sustain that. That's a pretty big upfront cost, and certainly something that can't be taken lightly. So I'll just note that. We'll provide some additional context in what I'll send you. If you look at sales and use tax at $75 million, you're roughly putting in an additional 8% distribution to local governments, very similar to what you just did with direct distribution. That would sustain that at that rough level. The value of sales and use tax is that it has the potential to grow over time, as would a permanent trust, but sales and use tax would have that. Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account is certainly another option. That perhaps one of the downsides is that would be a pretty level allocation over time, unless you put some sort of a consumer price index or other inflationary factor into that distribution. So I'll just leave it at that in terms of ways that you could fund this. Moving to eligible uses. You've heard correctly that the program in the budget indicated that you could only use funds for capital construction. We are here to suggest to you that that should be expanded to major maintenance as well. And I think that comes from a good place because I think all of you understand that investment in maintenance now has the capability of sustaining facilities far longer than simply ignoring those and continuing to build other infrastructure. We know that there's plenty of research out there. Organizations such as the American Public Works Association, the Government Finance Officers Association, and the Federal Highway Administration all acknowledge that timely maintenance and preservation investments can extend the useful life of roads, bridges, water systems, and other public infrastructure by decades while avoiding significantly more costly reconstruction later. So we will ask that you look at that. Next, allocation formula. I don't want to diminish the formula that exists in statute today. It does recognize hardship communities as part of it, as well as population. I will, however, tell you that the Joint Appropriations Committee has in some ways signaled to us that we might want to find another model. That direct distribution is really that mechanism to help hardship communities, and that countywide consensus should give some greater consideration to population, given the costs that can go along with that. I don't come to you with a specific recommendation, but we have modeled out what it could look like where you would take a base percentage of whatever is allocated and distribute that out to each of the counties, and then distribute based on population from there. We've done a 20% allocation to every county, and then everything else would go out via population based. It largely, interestingly enough, doesn't change the equation all that much, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention that the Appropriations Committee has signaled that they may be looking at this a little bit differently than the traditional hardship approach. So we're working on that. Mr. Chairman, now moving to timelines and countywide consensus plan. We've heard very clearly from the Joint Appropriations Committee that they do value the notion that you could accumulate funds over time for projects, but they want to see that the funding ultimately is going to use and that it's not just sitting there stagnant, and to Senator Jones' point, that it isn't just a kitty that's building up over time. So what we have emphasized to them is that you should continue to allow it to build up, but we should also ask and demand of local communities that they develop a plan. They should, as part of this countywide consensus process, develop a plan for how those funds are going to be allocated, what their project timelines are, and what their future aspirations might be under the program. And if they can't use that funding, then it should be subject to reversion. And so we've developed out some language that we'll provide to the Joint Appropriations Committee, and I'll make sure that you have that as well. It's also, I think, a good step in terms of the planning effort for communities to begin thinking about not only their local infrastructure needs, but also the broader economic development approach that they're intending to take. And I think this process in and of itself might lend towards communities seeking the technical assistance to develop things and brainstorm towards what we all hope to accomplish out of this. I won't belabor it. Population calculations, we also are going to recommend to the Appropriations Committee that you not just look at population as a place and time, but that evolves, because some of our communities grow rather quickly depending on what's going on, and that the distribution formula ought to recognize that particular thing. I do want to dwell on consensus and the threshold that exists there. The legislature adopted various different approaches to the consensus threshold over time, but ultimately settled on what you've heard as the county plus the municipalities representing 70% of the incorporated population. We're actually going to recommend that you move away from that. And I'll just use the Natrona County as an example. In Natrona County, the city of Casper in and of itself represents 74% of the population. There are 5 municipalities in this county. If you keep the threshold that you have in the bill, you will have, or there will be the ability for the city of Casper and Natrona County to come to agreement and do what they want with this funding, absent perhaps disagreement of those other 5 municipalities. What we're asking right now for you to adopt is an approach that exists in our current sales and use tax structure for the local options. And that is that you have to have the county plus 50% of the municipalities. So here in Natrona County, you'd have to have at least 3 of those municipalities as well as the county in order to reach consensus in order to use that fund. And to Senator Rothfuss's point, can it get sticky? Yeah. But that's what my members really like about this, and what we've heard from the municipalities is we all have to get around the table and we've got to figure it out if we want to be able to use this funding. I will say that some of the counties historically, Park County did it for a period of time, decided getting around the table was too difficult, so they just distributed it based on population. So they just made it really easy within their county for themselves. But others really have valued getting around that table and saying, okay, yeah, Albin, you need this. We're going to dedicate funding to you for a period of time. Laramie County is going to take the back seat for that period. But I certainly consensus sometimes comes with sticky, conversations. Lots of politicians in the room can create that. But this is local control, local governance, as the good chairman mentioned, at its finest. And so we're supportive of maintaining a consensus approach and threshold as part of this program. Mr. Chairman, definitions, absolutely agree. We need some definitions to this program. Some of those were established through the rulemaking process, and that's fair enough. But it also created some issues. We know that if you go back and look at the data that you're going to get from 2015 in terms of some of the allocations, one of the communities used it for purchasing a copier machine. I've heard loud and clear from the Joint Appropriations Committee that they don't want it being used for copy machines. So we have tried to develop a variety of definitions, and those things include capital project, what a countywide consensus plan is, what major maintenance and repair includes, what are public facilities and infrastructure as part of the definitions that we're bringing to the Joint Appropriations Committee, and which I'll share with you as quickly as I can. With that, Mr. Chairman, I did say that part of this memo also talks about program integration, sort of puts a placeholder on it. I've already talked about that a little bit at length of what I think that means and what we're trying to solve. So I won't go over it, but it is on our mind. And finally, as I've met with the agencies that oversee parts of this program, I don't want to devalue the fact that reinstituting this program, particularly for the Office of State Lands and Investments, is going to be a lift, and they may need some help in reinstituting this program. And I want to be part of trying to ensure that we don't overwhelm an already overwhelmed agency by instituting a pretty big program. So with that, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions, but again, appreciate your support.
I have some questions, but I know the group is going to have questions. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the last point about the Office of State Lands, and we obviously did have this go through Office of State Lands and through the board. What are we gaining from that? I mean, this is pretty prescriptive in terms of here's the number of dollars, you come to a consensus, as long as you follow the law, you're going to get that. And when we look at the direct distribution, for example, similar, we don't need a board to provide the direct distribution. We literally have a formula, we cut checks, and it goes out. Why do we need a political entity that's statewide to do anything, or their office to do anything in this process? What's the value add that they're providing?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, really good question, and part of what we're trying to work through in terms of program integration and what is a different model that we could ultimately propose to you. It is very possible that we'll come back to you and the Joint Appropriations Committee and say you could cut out the agencies entirely, and here's the model that we think can accomplish that. I'm not at the point where I'm ready to unveil that to you. I think that is going to take us a little bit more time this summer. Mr. Chairman, I do think, though, that perhaps the greatest value that the agency can provide is that they have the tools and systems to track this money and to roll up reports and information ultimately back to you and others. Not to say that local governments don't, but it is one point where that could ultimately go to. I will say, however, as we build out our recommendations for you, I think you can expect that we're going to suggest that their job is not to say that, well, maybe better way to put it, their job would be to say, yes, you have met all of the statutory construct for use of this money, go do good things. It's not to make a political decision or have other judgment perhaps about that, but simply to say, yes, you've met the program parameters. You can use these funds.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Quick follow-up on that. How much, and I don't remember the particulars, but you may well, in the past, when this has gone to the board, have they had any discussion during the distribution, or was this one of the, one of those agenda items that just ended up, everyone says aye and we move on? Because it doesn't seem like this should be political at the statewide level for the 5 electeds, and I actually don't recall whether there was any contention, whether anything was removed or crossed off. Do you have any recollection of that?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just answer briefly, but the program administrator of the program at the time is behind me, and I know she intends to speak. But it's my understanding that iteration of the board during that decade that this was in place did not provide input or judgment about it. It was simply, have you brought forward qualifying projects? Go do good.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Riggins.
He's not there.
Oh my, he's not there.
You want me to ask the question?
Yeah, no. Pinch hit for him, will you?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ryman, one of the reoccurring themes that we hear from our local communities is they need infrastructure help. And they don't need it a few years from now. They need it right now. They have roads that are falling apart, toilets that can't flush because the wastewater treatment plant is so old and antiquated. So if we're going to shoot for the moon on this new program or revitalizing this program, with Artemis, they had a booster rocket to get things started. And then they could, smaller rockets once you get outside the atmosphere. So wouldn't it be in our best interest to start off a little bigger and maybe do 200 million for the first biennium to get things kicked off so that these communities can get started with some of this infrastructure needs they have today?
Mr. Chairman, you're asking me to say no. Absolutely. That sort of support would be incredibly valuable and making some, perhaps catching up over what has been missed over the course of the past decade. And so we would welcome that sort of investment. And quite frankly, if I were to show you what even $75 million does statewide per year, it's not all that much when you start to break it up amongst 23 counties and then 99 municipalities. So having a shot in the arm initially to get going would be an incredible boost. And perhaps on top of them being able to then get long-term funding, allow for getting to projects, much larger projects more quickly.
Yes, Senator Roth.
So one of the concerns Senator Cooper and I were just discussing was the fact that from the legislature's perspective, it seems unlikely that we would just be adding new money. We would probably be looking at the direct distribution and somehow trading off with it. Would you still want this if it were subtracting from the direct distribution? Or do we want the direct distribution to be basically held sacred and only implement this if it's new dollars?
Mr. Chairman, to be very frank with you, if this is an either or, direct distribution is going to be the choice. So
Follow up on that. All right. So if we're talking $50 million a year, $75 million a year, and that could go through direct distribution instead of through this, what would we do?
Washing windows.
I think they're coming right.
Yeah.
I don't usually have people.
Cities are speaking.
yeah. Mr. Chairman, I don't, and Senator Rothfuss, I don't know that I have a complete answer. I don't know that I've looked at those sorts of figures right now. I think the value of this approach is you're forcing communities to get together and begin to prioritize projects over time and make investments in things that are ultimately going to change the trajectory of them for families and for businesses long term. And not to say that that couldn't happen with direct distribution, but direct distribution goes straight into your general fund, right? And doesn't force that conversation, that community conversation about what your larger investment should be.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that's a conversation that the counties and the communities need to have to understand what that trade-off would potentially look like and what would be optimal. Because if the general feeling is that we're better off just doing direct distribution, then we don't need to start up a new program. We just need to try and put more money in the direct distribution. I do think that from a legislative standpoint, it's probably going to come from the same resources. And if our cities, towns, and counties would rather have it as a direct distribution, I don't know why we would need to add a new program to accomplish something which isn't as valuable as the existing program.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, if I can just explore just a little bit as I think about it, as Senator Ross brings it forward, I think about let's pick the, town of Shoshone. I'll just, I don't know what their direct distribution amount is, but I don't imagine it's millions of dollars. But under a countywide consensus program, there is the potential that they might have an infusion year over year of $1 million. And so, maybe there is some value of having the two separate programs where we're trying to benefit and grow some of those resource-strapped communities that, even if you put 75 million more into direct distribution, really aren't going to see a measurable difference in terms of the funding that would be available to them.
Yes, Lawley. Representative Lawley has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really think there is a need for the distinction because one does focus on a very important element that we've all agreed is missing and needed to catch up on, which is infrastructure. And the direct distribution money in the smaller counties, I could just speak for them, goes for a lot of other things other than that. If they had it to use, that they could take that and put it in infrastructure, they would be doing that. They're not. So there's two different kind of goals with with each approach. So I don't know what the basis of saying we have to make a choice. Maybe we would eventually, but I don't see that is, that we have to yet. So I do think this is different, but I will tell you, I want to see some numbers on any sort of changing of the formula. And, Wyoming has historically really taken care of what we call frequently the hardship counties, which does have to do with lower property valuation and how that affects them. They've been, significantly affected with every time we make any adjustments on property taxes, for example. And so we kind of keep putting them at disadvantage if we don't take care. And so it's not surprising to you to hear that I'm very concerned about how they might redo that formula. And in terms of actually seeing the numbers per county, because it still costs a lot. And one can argue that there's additional costs that some of the more remote counties have to pay to get people in to do infrastructure work, because we just don't have people in the community that do that kind of thing. And so I can make some arguments why that I do understand the population element and it's included in there, but if you monkey with it too much, I think you could really hurt hardship counties, and maybe with some misconceptions about how they're disadvantaged in the area of even getting folks in to do infrastructure and the costs of those companies. You pay for that when they have to come in and people have to live in hotel rooms for periods of time to complete infrastructure projects. The communities pay for that. So
Wouldn't you agree?
wouldn't you agree?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, Mr. Chairman, agree. And I will provide you what those side-by-sides look like. And if anybody needs a copy of the table and formula that, calculates it based on the previous formula, I do have that available. And like I said, I did the old formula and then I did a 20% base, 80% population, and it didn't really move it that much for our high population areas. I'll just use an example. So Laramie County, under the old formula, would get about $11.1 million. Under the what I suggested, a 20 base, 80% population, they would actually receive $100,000 less, even though they're the largest population county. Now, your county would lose not quite $400,000, but almost that much. So it didn't do what I thought, and that's why I don't know that I'm coming forward with a recommendation around changing it at this point in time. But we were trying to tease out what the Joint Appropriations Committee was interested in.
Representative Knapp has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I had the opportunity as a former county commissioner for 12 years to experience the consensus grant, and it worked very well. While it's true that there's negotiations that happen between cities, towns, and counties, I do like your recommendation of a county plus 50% of the cities and towns agreeing to the consensus list. But do you think that it's important to remember this conversation came up of reinstating consensus dollars in lieu of the business ready grants that we had with Wyoming Business Council? It's also different from SLIB because in both instances, it's communities coming forward with projects to be picked among statewide projects, and there's a limited amount of money and lots of projects going on. This would actually establish an opportunity for communities to have infrastructure dollars on a consistent basis, and especially for rural communities, to be able to save up for a project where direct distribution dollars have become more operational because they're limited to what you can use those for. Don't you think this is just another tool to have consistent dollars for infrastructure that both larger communities, but more importantly, smaller communities can rely on to get family ready, or to at least keep up with infrastructure in their own community.
Yep. Mr. Chairman and Representative Knapp, I absolutely agree that if you're trying to look at business-ready communities against countywide consensus, countywide consensus ensures that every one of our governmental units across the state have access to infrastructure dollars. And that's not to say that they don't all have the potential to access business-ready communities, but there's no guarantees there. And you have to make the ask. You have to have a number of things in place. So having countywide consensus in place is a critical piece. But I am also very clear, and I was with the Appropriations Committee, that there's still some value in having a backstop, whether we call it the Business Ready Communities Program or something else. You have to have something that is available when you get into that place where the funding that even countywide consensus provides isn't enough to take the infrastructure investment leap that you need to make, whether that's for families or for businesses in the future of your community. So I still think we have to have both. We haven't cracked the code. That's part of the integration piece that we're trying to figure out, and that we intend to bring something back to you later this year on.
Okay. Oh, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ryman, I'm not sure I see this as an either or decision. I think that this infrastructure can be an economic driver for our state by providing for the infrastructure we need in our communities that will drive economic benefit. So could we keep with our direct distribution? We've made major changes to that this last session. I would hate to disrupt that, but could we fund this through economic development resources and trying to develop our infrastructure in our towns, and hopefully that will spur economic development throughout the state? Am I seeing that wrong?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Heiner, you're looking at it the exact same way that we are. This is an investment in economic development. For us, it starts with families and making sure that we can keep, and grow our families here. But it is a critical piece of that economic development chain that we're trying to work towards. So you and I are on the exact same plane as it regards this.
All right. Representative Regan's. He's back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
He's back.
I was contemplating a question. So when you talked about Senator Ross's idea of just combining all this in direct distributions, I'd like to think that this might instill some discipline in how this money is used when we talk about critical infrastructure, because we hear Mr. Rural Water, we have $6 billion in critical infrastructure to replace when we don't have that kind of money. And it seems we're always putting that off, looking for other ways to pay for it, federal funds, putting it off. Meanwhile, the things we desire, we are spending money on. So I would like to think that will be the result, is that this will be applied to the critical infrastructure of every town and community. When you get past that point, there's always going to be a balance where you can start spending money elsewhere, those things you like and desire. But hopefully this will be addressed towards the most important parts that don't imperil your community if you ignore them.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, you've hit it on the head. I think that's exactly how we're envisioning this as well. And it's part of why we've suggested there should be a plan that's developed. It's not just about a consensus about how you're going to use the dollars. It's a consensus about what is your long-term vision for your community, utilizing these dollars to get there.
Question there, Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming up. By what metrics? One of the biggest concerns that I've had with the Business Council is we've expended this money and we really are not able to gauge how effective that was on the communities. So what are some metrics? What are some bench lines, some baselines? What are the metrics that we could use to gauge the effectiveness of this money spent?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Campbell, I think part of that will be determined at the local level. But for me, the most important metric out of the gate ought to be, are we able to retain our youth in this particular state?
One of the biggest things that I've seen is we have a lot of these large projects that come into smaller communities. The last time we met, I brought up the town of Kimmerer as an example. We've known about that power plant going in there for years, but right now they're rushing to get infrastructure into place and they don't have the lodging. They just don't have the amenities. What I'm looking for is I want a program that is going to empower those communities. When we talk about community development, I am thinking that we are creating a business opportunity for these mostly smaller communities that get these large projects dropped on them. I am looking for them to be able to gauge off of sales tax brought in. We should be able to, for example, to look at the sales tax of what that community was doing prior to us funding a project. And then a metric would be, we could look at the sales tax that is generated. Did this project increase the sales tax revenue? That is a very direct thing that we could look at. And that's kind of the concept that I have in mind with this. I mean, one of the biggest problems with the Wyoming Business Council has we've done all these wonderful large things, but the metrics do not show that. The communities are still not bringing in the sales revenue that you would expect to see.
That's a good measure, but in a lot of cases, we give away that sales tax right up front. So there is no change to the sales tax.
Well, what I'm talking
that is problematic.
What I'm talking about, Senator, is like in Kimmerer, Wyoming, it's very obvious that lodging is a huge concern for that. Since they don't have any lodging, they don't have the restaurants or the bars or the gas station business that they would. Lodging is definitely a problem. So I am looking at the Business Council as a role because they are business experts. In our smaller communities do not have the resources to hire study groups and some of these big parties. So I'm looking at the Business Council to go in and help them identify the weaknesses in their community. Because if Kimmerer right now, most of the folks in Kimmerer, the workers, are staying in Evanston or Green River or even Salt Lake City. So those towns are enjoying the business. The work is happening in Kimmerer. The roads and bridges are getting tore up in Kimmerer, Wyoming. But the workers are staying in Evanston, Green River, and Salt Lake City. So those communities are getting the benefits of those workers, where the town of Kimmerer itself is not. They're more of a utility corridor than a community in this concept.
I think the Business Council is doing exactly that. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that I can offer a whole lot more to the conversation, and I don't want to represent the Business Council in that, but Representative Campbell, what you're getting at, though, is that had Kimmerer had access to infrastructure money to put in the water, sewer, roads, and other infrastructure, it would have made the housing development a whole lot easier than trying to do the whole kit and caboodle.
Okay. All right. It should wrap it for the municipalities. Josh Durrell, you're next to give us a briefing on this.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Josh Durrell. I'm the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. The information that Mr. Riemann shared is incredibly useful, and seeing the bill draft is a good thing, and I think his comments and ideas are really well-founded, and he's got a lot of experience there. We want to work and have worked continuously with him on this. What I would say is that sort of adding to his commentary, I would like the legislature to consider building on the framework by integrating that stronger planning that he mentions, but an economic lens into this process. Countywide consensus plan should encourage communities to identify their key barriers to growth, consider regional interdependence, and prioritize projects that really increase economic competitiveness. Just as a little bit of an aside, a lot of the things that we're talking about right now occur, especially with Representative Lawley's comments about recruiting, that's an economic competitiveness issue. It is, there are leads that come that way, but we have to be able to compete. And so I think that aligns well with the regional planning approach that we're taking and those assessment to action plans. I also think that we need to think about this program to create incentives for communities to build local project development capacity. This body could consider requiring or encouraging consensus plans to include basic asset inventories. Talked about assets a little bit today. Project readiness information. How ready is the community for economic competitiveness? Funding stacks. What funding is available at a community? How would they be competitive in a situation? Their own local match strategies, maintenance plans, and then that connection to the regional economic planning. Those requirements should remain practical for small communities, but they could help move this from a distribution type of model toward more of a capacity building model, which I think is what we're really trying to bridge. We definitely think that there's a clear distinction between countywide consensus funding and the Business Ready Community Program. Consensus funding, and I think Mr. Riemann says it well, should serve as broad, locally driven infrastructure that helps communities maintain and improve their public systems that make growth possible. And BRC should remain a separate targeted economic development tool focused on projects tied to business development, workforce growth, and private investment opportunities. In that sense, consensus funding and BRC should work together, but they shouldn't be merged into the same purpose. Consensus funding can help communities be that more family friendly and infrastructure ready, and BRC can then support strategic projects that convert readiness into economic growth, business expansion, and new investment. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. But again, I think one thing I want to make sure is that folks know we support this effort to make sure that our communities have the infrastructure funding necessary to compete. We think it's incredibly important.
Question is Representative Riggins. No. Okay, no questions, Josh. Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
I was waiting for you.
Regan's replacement here.
That's right. Josh, on that point, though, the one challenge with providing an economic justification or a readiness business development justification is that sometimes it's just, well, we need a storm sewer system. And that truly is a fundamental, yes, we need this in place before we can have any economic development. But I look at Laramie, and that's probably the really exciting thing that Laramie would immediately first come up with is something along those lines, because those are exactly the kinds of things that Laramie needs right now. What are your thoughts on that aspect where you're just at a fundamental level, just trying to get your community ready to be a community, and for the consensus block grant, it's not really rising to the anything that's really on the radar for economic development?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, the answer is yes. The answer is that is a real situation, and we should understand it. But we shouldn't miss the opportunity to use this as a way to think aspirationally and think long-term and make sure that there's some sort of continuity in the planning. I don't think that it's one or the other. I think that that is probably step zero, is having a functional water system, whether that's storm sewer, whether that's sanitary sewer, whether that's water distribution. You've got to have it. However, we believe and we see communities wanting to be aspirational and look toward the future. And we see this as another opportunity for them to do it. And so let's just not let this opportunity pass, I guess is what I'm saying. So I think it can be both.
Sure.
How would we actually implement that? Getting back to the idea that I don't necessarily want SLIB to be making a decision. I would much prefer it to be a distribution out based on a criteria set that says, yes, you've checked your boxes, here's your money. So it's already political. Let's not make it more political. How do we interject some sort of higher level strategy into the process without making it political?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, I think that you could have a higher level strategy that is definitely not political. In fact, it should probably not be political at all. I think it could be as simple as a checkbox or as a, hey, we've done regional planning or we've done our consensus planning. Here's how it fits into the broader regional planning that the Business Council is part of. Here are the tools we've used. I'm not necessarily at this point ready to say that it should be some sort of rigid, you should do assessment to action followed by a regional plan. And then here's the structure for a consensus plan. We don't have that worked out. And I'm not sure if that's something that I think we should prescribe. However, I think it is something that we should require that it be done. The methodology that's used, maybe that's where the flexibility is. But I do think a broader, longer term view of how this money can be used and how they're looking at their assets and their barriers to growth is incredibly important. So I think it can be as simple as a requirement that is essentially a checkbox or a, hey, we've done this.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Josh, thank you.
Right on.
Thank you for being with us the last 2 days.
My pleasure.
Yeah. All right. The SLIB board, you're going to make, oh, there we are.
Make that at the end. It's just related to drafting all those recommendations for WBC. Do that later.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Stacia Berry with the Office of State Lands and Investments. I join you today mostly to offer food for thought because I don't necessarily have any recommendations for the committee, but more so some of the questions that especially Senator Rothfuss has been raising. Just in to consider what the expectation for what this program might look like and what interface or level of scrutiny that you're looking for potentially from the Office of State Lands and Investments and potentially from the State Loan and Investment Board. So just some questions to contemplate as you work through your process is, what level of oversight and interaction are you looking for from our office? I think you may hear some testimony later today from Ms. Blackwell, who previously worked in this space at our office, on what level of compliance the office looked for historically. And that was more so geared towards, are the entities that are coming forward for these countywide consensus projects that are being funded compliant with the Department of Revenue requirements and the Department of Audit requirements? And if they are, they're eligible entities, these projects can move forward. If that's something that you're looking for from our office, we can certainly accommodate that, but just would need to know most specifically what you're looking for. And then thinking about funds distribution in some of the options that are before the committee today, this more so does look like the direct distribution model where these funds go to the counties. And if that is the case, that is certainly fine with us. If not, being specific in what the expectation is if these funds would be reimbursed from our office and all of those grant draft requests coming in through our office, or more so that it would all be handled at a county level. So our questions are logistical and tactical in nature and how this would be carried out just for the committee to contemplate. The last portion that I would ask you to consider is how you will handle any funds that do go unused. I will mention that our office right now still holds monies that have gone unused from the countywide consensus program that sit on our books that are over 10 years old. There's not a lot of funds left. It's about $1.1 million, but about 600,000 of those are still obligated to projects that we're working to unobligate, and 400,000 weren't used for those projects, but that's a very small amount of money that then, since they never revert, haven't been able to be redeployed. So just request to have good direction on what would happen to those funds when perhaps a community is able to more efficiently achieve their project and there are some funds left over, and where those might go so that they don't get stuck in some sort of purgatory going unused. So those are our main points for consideration. Happy to answer questions if I can. If not, we just wanted to make sure that the committee was thinking about those pieces and how you wanted it to look.
So you're okay with us if we cut you out of this entirely?
Certainly up to you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? No. Questions for Stacy? No questions for Stacy. Oh,
Yes,
One.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Barry, since 2014, 2016, we've still got some projects that are going on that you have some encumbered funds. What kind of projects would they be?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, I wouldn't say that the projects are necessarily ongoing. The funds just weren't expended. And so what we have done is sent letters to project proponents that have any of those. We sent those letters about 2 weeks ago to ask that exact question: is there any activity ongoing? We still have these dollars on the books. If not, what that at least allows the director to do by rule is unobligate those funds. So then we will have the full 1.16 as they're not assigned to a project and they're not obligated. They would just need to be repurposed by counties. The problem you will see is you might have a county that has $700 where it's then unobligated. And so when you're looking at efficiencies on how does when you go to think about how you're spending your time as a county and a community, everybody coming together to redeploy that small amount of funds that are left over is not terribly efficient. So I don't have a list with me today of those projects, but we're trying to at least de-obligate those funds so that then you have that chunk of money that can maybe be repurposed for what you might do in the future.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. So Director, those funds are in your office. They're not residing at the county level right now. That's $700 that's in your office.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, that is correct, because formerly the way these funds were dispersed is on a reimbursement basis. So when those funds would be awarded to counties for these purposes, they would seek the funding in a reimbursement fashion, project by project.
So if you found out that they're not encumbered, we could revert those into this consensus block grant fund and reutilize them. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's my goal, is to have those unobligated so that when you're prepared to move with what you'd like to do next, these funds can move forward and be used in the future.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We look forward to cutting you out. Okay, is there any public comment on this good little bill? There is public comment.
Chairman Committee, I'm Beth Blackwell. I am the Grants and Loans Specialist for the City of Newcastle. As Director Barry stated, my prior occupation was with Office of State Lands and Investments for approximately 13 years. So I know this program pretty well. One thing I would like to answer.
And what's your name?
Beth Blackwell.
Beth?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
One answer to Senator Rothfuss's question about the engagement of SLIB with these projects. Historically, these were on the consent list. When I started at OSLI, how I was trained was countywide consensus. Generally, when you get an application from an entity, you got also a joint resolution form, and that kind of laid out the priorities of the projects, and it included all the necessary signatures. And so we would get the applications in, make sure we had the required amount of signatures that covered that 70% of the population. We then would verify per our rules that the entities were compliant with Department of Audit, Department of Revenue, to make sure that we had checked the boxes, make sure the project is a capital construction project. I will say the one project that I questioned during my time at OSLI was a police dog because the funds could not be used for personnel. So my question was, how are you going to list this on your balance sheet? Because to me, a police dog was personnel and not so much an asset. But historically, the communities could come together and they worked really well together. That 70% population, I do think with Jeremiah Ryman's tweaks, I've been working with him, changing that to 50% of the municipalities levels the playing field. And it really makes it a better program and a better ability for our small communities to come and negotiate those needs for those dollars. I would say that countywide consensus is one of those tools that if we had had it for the last 10 years, I think what happened during ARPA would have been a little less. I say that meaning countywide consensus funds allowed our communities to take care of their problems before they became an emergency. These funds allowed them to have that 25% match that they needed to come and get a business-ready community grant or loan, or come in and ask for a mineral royalty grant program. Or these funds were also regularly used to help close landfills before the cease and transfer program came about. And even once that program came about, those entities still had to provide a match unless they were identified as a hardship community. So countywide consensus funds are so different than direct distribution funds in the sense that they play an active role in getting necessary projects done in a community. I say that meaning our small communities, your communities of Manville or even Upton. Upton's a great example of, they're a community of less than 1,000 people. They have used their countywide consensus funds to match SLIB grants and loans. They have done everything they possibly can. And for a community of that size, they're probably one of the only communities in the state that are at maintenance for their water and sewer systems. They have 4 miles left, and their whole distribution system on both sides are going to be completely replaced. They will be the only community in the state that has that. I applaud them for that, because now what we're facing is the cost to replace our infrastructure is exorbitant. The increase to replace a foot of water line from 2020 to now has increased from $200 a foot to over $600 a foot. That is not affordable for our small communities to replace their infrastructure. So countywide consensus funds, I think, are invaluable. And I think it's one of the most important tools in our community's toolboxes because they have the ability to use those funds to match other grants, whether it's state grants or federal grants. I think the other thing that's, as I listen to you talk about planning and knowing what needs to be done, one of the things that you did this last legislative session was passing the water study to study your drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. You guys will likely be blown away at the costs that are going to come about from that study. Water systems have been managed much better than our sewer systems in the state because there's much more available funding to do those projects, specifically the Water Development Commission. Wastewater systems primarily have enterprise account funds, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and mineral royalty grants, and business ready community if they can meet those requirements. And so I think what we're going to find through those studies is we're going to have $10 to $20 billion worth of infrastructure for just those systems That's not including our roads. That's not including any of our other infrastructure. As you all discussed, infrastructure projects, I think, are absolutely economic development. They impact our tourism. We don't want to be a Flint on the front page anywhere on the news saying you can't drink our water here. It's not safe to come here because we have bad water and we don't manage our wastewater systems. So it's important that we continue to invest in these. Sorry, I have a bunch of comments. The other thing is, having worked at OSLI, there's a benefit from having those funds run through OSLI, maybe not through the SLIB board. My thought is taking some of the burden off of our communities. When I was at the office in pre-2020 and COVID hitting and us having all the extra funding, every 6 months we sent those letters that Director Berry was discussing of, you haven't made a draw from your grant. What are your plans? And a lot of times that's how we got money back. We did that very aggressively at the end of bienniums with MRG funding because that money went away. And so if a project was done, we wanted to gobble those funds back. And so pre-2020, every 6 months, a community would get a letter asking what you're doing with those funds. Given the impact and all the program management that we had after 2020 with CARES and ARPA, that just wasn't one of those tasks that we could do while we were processing all the grant agreements and payment requests. But what we found during that process is when there's changeover in personnel at communities or county level, people don't pass the knowledge that they have a grant available, that they have that money. There were often times that I would reach out to communities that had millions of dollars and they had no idea they had that money sitting there because no one told them. No one communicated it to them. And that is one of my concerns about leaving this money at the local level, is that burden is put on those clerks, treasurers that already have a lot on their plates. So if we're putting this burden on them that they have to continue to monitor all this, and then they have to drop everything to answer a request to respond to what your balance is. Sometimes utilizing the tools that OSLI has, specifically their grant management system, that program allows them to do ad hoc reporting. So if any one of you wanted to know what a community had received for funding, they can simply go into the system, type in the community, and it'll tell you all the funding that that community has received, whether it's countywide consensus loans, whatever. So that's the benefit to having it go through OSLI, is all that information is kept in one place and the burden isn't put on the communities to have to do that. I had a few other comments related to your prior conversations. Is that all right for me to address now? And address related to business council? Okay. Related to the housing, what I learned this week at the WAM conference is it is more affordable for someone living in Fort Collins to purchase a home than it is for someone living in Laramie. Our median household income has not kept up with the cost of homes. Having been a bank examiner, I learned early on that we don't experience the big decreases in housing costs that, say, the rest of the country experienced in 2008. So our homes are either going up or the values are plateauing. We're never really seeing that decrease to reset the market, to make homes affordable for people that are buying first-time homes, for kids to stay in our communities. So I encourage the conversation related to housing to continue, because a lot of times I'm hearing that it's not government's position to be in that. However, we're a small state and it's going to take all of us in the boat to make that housing situation better. And that means the state, the counties, the municipalities, and even our companies that are coming into this state. We need to all get in the boat and row together and find a way to fix that. One of the things that I am trying to prove out is fixing housing doesn't have to be a big project. You can do it by doing infill. We have a joint project with Newcastle or Newcastle and Upton, where we are going to take care of our dilapidated properties to address our housing problem. Newcastle is landlocked. There are a lot of dilapidated homes, and every community in the state could start by taking their dilapidated properties, cleaning them up, whether it's a lot or a home, fix it up, sell it, make it livable. If it's a lot, clean it, make it available to sell so someone can build a home on it. These are simple ways to address our housing without having to do a large investment into the infrastructure costs. Your water, your sewer, your streets are already there in that infill process. So that it could be an approach that we take that takes small bites at that apple, but at least we're taking bites at the apple while we're trying to figure out how to take the big bite at the apple. You guys discussed this earlier, is maybe our problem is we have too many programs that are specific to a problem. Maybe what we need is a fewer programs, more heavily funded with some flexibility in it. Specifically, say business ready community. I spoke with our regional representative about potentially doing a joint project once again with Upton. And since it was existing infrastructure, it didn't really fit in with their program. It needed to be new infrastructure. Well, unfortunately, sometimes the barrier to economic development in communities isn't the lack of new infrastructure, but it's the lack of dependability of their current infrastructure. And so allowing programs to be used for current and new infrastructure would be a benefit. One of the other programs that is available that it was a great tool and has been completely eliminated. It's still there, but it's not useful, is the capital construction loan program. That program is still relatively new. It came about in 2018. The tagline with that program was, let's invest in Wyoming and not Wall Street. That program started out with terms of 1 year to 25 years with an interest rate of 1% to 2.5% at the max. The new interest rate for this program is tied to the yield of the U.S. Treasury of the same duration of the loan. This is quadrupled that 5-year interest rate because a 5-year Treasury is over 4% now. That program also now has a floor of 3%, so that max interest rate of 2.5%, you can't even get down to that level, even if Treasuries got down that low. Additionally, that program has another 2% risk premium that can be added to that interest rate. So that program has now become unaffordable for communities to use. That program was a great program that used to be used in conjunction with clean water, drinking water, mineral royalty grant funding, where you cobbled 5 or 6 different funding sources together to fund a really big project. And so I encourage you to maybe look at that program also as an opportunity, as a source and a tool that we could use going forward, and adding the ability to use those capital construction loan funds for housing as well. Based on the information on SLIB's website and the reports for Monday's meeting, there is $119 million available in that program currently to be loaned out. So let's stand for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Very good. Next.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Mark Christensen. I wanted to offer a couple comments. In terms of development, I do have some background here. I've developed 137 lots in Gillette, residential, I've done some commercial as well. And first and foremost, I think that some of the discussion is a result of we have local government that's unhealthy. And it's just because, like, when there was talk about arterials and the different pieces of them, like my background, I would say that the arterials are the responsibilities of the local government. So local government's responsibility to make sure there's enough capacity in the sewer plant, there's enough water available, that the main arterial roadways and the minor arterial roadways are taken care of. I would then say, though, that when you get into the individual neighborhood, then that becomes the developer's responsibility. The problem, though, is still with the mills where they're at, or with direct distribution, or with sales tax, you still can't afford to maintain that. And so at some point, Wyoming's gonna have to have the conversation, which is, we lived in Wyoming because we want wide open spaces, but that's also not the most efficient way to operate and maintain infrastructure. I appreciate her comments on infill. I think that's one of the things that makes some of the most sense in the interim in this state. But a lot of it too is just strictly driven by cost. So I told you last time, I said, if I were to put in any more lots, I'd have roughly 80,000 in them before we sold anything. And by the time we'd add profit to that, we'd be close to 100. So to keep the ratios correct, then that's a $500,000 home, which doesn't really work well for, I'm not even calling it affordable housing, like I'm calling it workforce housing. Like that's still even hard for workforce housing. And if you look in Gillette right now, homes that are priced fair over 500,000, a lot of those are going under market in 6 to 9 hours. So there is just not enough housing. There are some solutions I think you could take. So first, I am so happy that you're bringing back consensus. I will say that as a commissioner too. It always forced us all to get around the table and agree. And it was the things that needed to be done, but nobody wanted to pay for it entirely themselves. And that's a great program. To your point about Representative Heiner's point about an infusion up front, I agree with that. I would do it slightly different. And where I would say is in terms of incentivizing bringing up existing infrastructure, so water, sewer, the treatment plants. The point she made is correct. We post a lot of water, but I've said that the biggest unfunded liability in Wyoming is the sewage treatment plants. Those are all built in the 70s and 80s. They're all end of life, and they're all extremely expensive. But what I would do is if you get your groups, if your county agrees and you put money towards those type of upgrades, I think that you should be able to instantly apply for like an additional 50% that's approved. So like incentivize the good behavior of bringing it up by adding more to the pot. And then I think that you would also, I would tag on there a requirement that's like, they have to have a plan to manage it right long-term, which means like an infrastructure enterprise fund for sewer, the infrastructure enterprise fund for water, the same thing for trash. Some of the stuff you guys required as a part of solid waste when you went and got solid waste monies. And then get some of those one-time monies, but let them have some big bang up here up front. And at the same time, incentivize government to set aside and operate those funds where they're self-perpetuating in the future. On housing specifically, a lot of places what you see is you could shift part of the development cost long-term as opposed to upfront. So here, when we traditionally do it, you buy the lot and the developer gets fully repaid and makes a profit. A lot of other places, the publicly accepted infrastructure gets, like there's bonds that could go against it. So basically like an HOA or a metro district or something else repays those over 20, 30 years. That helps bring your cost down then instead of having a $100,000 lot. Maybe that lot is 50,000 up front and 50 of it gets paid over time. So the problem with that though is, and this goes to what I would say, I liked what Senator Rothfuss was saying, loans and different things. The problem is there's two pieces. You have to make sure that the development infrastructure actually gets built. Because last thing you want is one of those situations where there's houses built, but the streets and water never get put in. But at the same time, like I think you want to make sure that you're not incentivizing bad development. Because I appreciate the governor's comment in his letter is like there's some people that will just chase tax incentives. And those aren't the people you want to do business with either. So what I would look at it is a portion of those that were public improvements could become bonded. And I think that's a place that maybe the developer has to finance it up front so that they have to put it in place and then they would have to prove it's a viable project. And then once that infrastructure is accepted by the city or county, so like at some point when somebody states that infrastructure is substantially complete according to spec, that then maybe that bond could be held and in the state portfolio. paid over a period of time at a set interest rate. And I think that it doesn't have to be below market. I think you could set it at a market rate. And that means that if the developer preferred to do it in a way where they went to the private market, they could. But it would also address the fact that, like, if you're talking about 7 million, you're not going to go out to underwrite for bonds. So like it would fill that small gap that we have in Wyoming a little bit better way. And the other thing I was going to add was we like to talk a lot about regulation, but I would say that I've worked in a couple of, or more than one of the communities here, and I don't really find the local communities to be that bad to work with. I may sometimes disagree with them on like width of street or whether or not we need curb and gutter in this particular period, but I generally find them to be pretty good. A lot of the costs though are construction related because of construction costs here. But then when you talk about the regulation, a lot of that's building codes and other pieces, and you can't really meddle with those because what I learned as a commissioner was how good we covered the county for fire cost X amount of money. But the ISO rating we got determined how much everybody in that community's insurance cost. And there's certain other pieces that are going to drive some of that conversation. And so I like where you're headed. I like your direction. I think that you're making good investments there. I just provide a few of those thoughts as maybe some context or color. So, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for your comments. We appreciate your background and your knowledge. Any other public comments? Public comments, more public comments. Is there any in the Zoom land? No public comments in Zoom land? No room comments? We'll close public comments and should we keep working this and then we'll get to your bill?
Work what? Yes.
This bill?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, okay, all right. So, Manny, what's your pleasure on this bill? Move the bill. Moved and seconded. And any discussion, Yes.
I guess I'd ask if we want to do it now or if we want to get more of the input that we were hearing about from the county commissioners on specific approaches to it, do it at the next meeting, which would be my inclination. So not that I oppose the bill, but that I've had the impression from the discussion that there might be some suggested changes that we should be doing. And I don't think we're prepared to do those right now. I'd look to the county commissioners, for example, in the cities for some details on how to implement it. My inclination would be to hold it off and vote on it in the next meeting.
The county commissioners are also making that same approach to the JAC, and I kind of wonder if we're going to have two bills or if the JAC is going to be the dominant bill on this. And I think it'll be our bill that's dominant, but I don't know that.
At least we can make it that way.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it would make some sense for us to have all the input we could get. And we're far enough along on this bill now that we could complete it in the next meeting. So what? Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Fuller.
So Mr. Chairman, for the third meeting, the current plan is that one of those 2 days would be held jointly with the Joint Appropriations Committee. They are looking at this topic, given the meeting schedules, things are moving at different paces, but just wanted to note that for the committee that is at least the plan right now is that there would be one day would be a joint meeting with JAC on the Business Council. This would be a topic I presume would be included in that discussion.
Do you know if the county is invited to speak at that meeting?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that would be up to you as well.
Okay.
If you wanted them there, I think they could be there. Yep.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, my thoughts are maybe we make some amendments to this bill draft that we have and then hold it on the table until we meet with the JAC. And then we have our version and they will have their version and we can work it into one bill at that point. But to have our comments and changes in this bill draft, that way they can see what direction we're headed. But we don't have
That's a
to,
good suggestion.
well, I don't come up with them often, so mark it down.
All right. Is there any amendments to this bill that we're going to hold off on? Is there anything anybody would like to change? Yes, Mr.
Yes, I will.
Representative Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll kick it off. I recommend that for the funding, we kickstart this with a booster rocket. We do 100 million per year for the first biennium, so 200 million, and then 50 million per year for 100 million per biennium thereafter. And those numbers are going to change. We know they will change year to year and this first year, but that's my proposal is we start off with a big bang, 200 million for the biennium with 100 million thereafter.
That would hit on page 3, I guess, there where the 35 million is. You're saying it would be 100 million
Yes.
instead of 35
Yeah,
million for the first
2 years. First 2 years.
First 2 years.
And then back down to 50 million per year thereafter.
You have that, Fuller?
I need a second.
I'll take it.
Moved and seconded, 100 million first 2 years, 50 million after that. Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. That motion squeaked by. Any others? Yes.
Yeah, I have one. I would move to amend to change the consensus mechanism to be equivalent to what we're currently using for the 6 cents of sales tax. I believe that's accurate. But basically the sales tax consensus mechanism that was proposed is a better mechanism.
And I'm not following where that would be. Are you talking about on page 5 where they decide the?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, correct. It's the 70% is what's shown there. We have language and we just amended it, I want to say 3 years ago or 4 years ago. I believe it's for the 6th, and if you're working in the 7th cent, it's the consensus mechanism used, which is the county and 50% of the municipalities. I'm pretty sure that's exactly right, but basically what we use for the sales tax.
Mr. Ryman.
Correct. That was his recommendation. Yeah.
And so
I'll second that.
moving to seconded. So Mr. Fuller, that would be page 5, line 18. Stop at the end of and eliminate everything up to to comprise not less than 50% of the incorporated population shall certify. Right?
Mr. Chairman, or I would give him the flexibility to do it however he feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I want him to do it like I did.
Which might be the way you did it. Exactly.
And Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I would just basically take the language from 3915
That's what I
203
Correct.
that we use.
That was my
back and put it in here.
That was my expectation. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any discussion on that?
Oh, we have to vote on that.
Any discussion on that motion? All right. All in favor of that motion for the 50%, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman.
Any others?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would propose that we add into this bill a reversion mechanism, as we heard from the Director on the state lands. Any unobligated, unencumbered monies that they were able to find that reverts back to this new fund that we're creating. And hopefully it's tens of millions of dollars, but it may just be very small.
1.6 million.
Yes, Brian has a question about that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Heiner, I think my question, so 2 questions would be, I assume you mean the money that's going to be distributed under this bill draft or the old money? Okay, thank you,
So
Mr.
If the
Chairman.
money that's residing there that she's trying to figure out if the
What to do with it. 1.6, wasn't it?
yeah, very.
And so, Mr. Chairman, my next question with that then would be, is there, typically we'd want some sort of time kind of trigger, a date on which those funds would revert. That would, I think, be helpful to include in the draft.
So let's, she's going to, the state lands are there, you have to determine if they're encumbered or unobligated first. And our testimony here was it'll take a few weeks. I would suggest at the time the bill is signed that those reverts. So that would be next spring. Got a second?
Oh, we got a second down here. Representative Weber seconded that. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? All right. All in favor of the reversion of the SLIB 1.6 million, signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Representative Reagans, you got a.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering, are these monies just going to be annually distributed? Or each year is a county's going to have to go up to the SLIB board and make a presentation? Okay, just confirming that.
Presented. Going to be distributed.
Yep. So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, the bill is admittedly silent on that. And so if that's something the committee would want to clarify in the bill draft, whether SLIB approval is or is not needed, I would leave that to the committee. One example would be, the legislature recently passed that kind of small business emergency bridge loan program. And in that bill draft, there's express language that says that once the OSLI director determines that the loan, the applicant qualifies, no further approval from SLIB is required. It would be entirely up to the committee to decide how to proceed in that manner. But that is just one example of an option.
One more. Oh, you got.
I have a comment.
Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I like the idea that the Representative Riggins had brought up about is it, a possibility of coming back in front of the committee to say, hey, here's what we're asking for, here's what the progress is, here's what we're still waiting for, so that it doesn't just go on into infinity without any updates. I'm in favor of that. Thank you.
Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple amendments. One, I would like to, on page 4, include major maintenance, in addition to the word capital projects and major maintenance.
Which line is that?
Where are you?
I'm right now at 16 on line 4, but I don't know if that's the only place that we have it in here, but where we're talking about expended for capital projects, including capital projects constructed for special districts. I would add capital projects and major maintenance.
That's on line 18.
On 18, and then you would have to do the same on 19.
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, one option for that to simplify amending, every instance of that term in the bill is defining capital project, in which case that could also include major maintenance.
I think that's an excellent idea, Brian. So that's my motion right there.
Second.
Moved and seconded to make capital projects maintenance also. Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have
Representative
another
Lowe.
motion I'd like to make. I'm trying to find the page number. Someone can help me, but it has to
It's at
do
the
with
bottom of the page.
the distribution model. It's at the bottom of the page. The distribution model, would propose a change from 80-20 to 75-25. So I've got to find the page though.
Page
Sorry.
3, line 11.
Yep, there you go. Page 3, right here where I am.
Back.
Line 11. So would basically multiply by 75 instead of 80, and then down on,
It's just the remainder, so it's.
yeah, it's a remainder, yeah. Wait, so 75%, which would leave a 25% that's done based on the amount of property valuation inversed.
Moved and seconded to change the 80% to 75% on line 11, page 3. Any more discussion? Any other discussion? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, 75% it is.
And Mr. Chairman, just
Yeah.
real quick, I just wanted to go back to Representative Weber's comment. And on page, and I think this maybe starts to get at her comment, but on page 8, line 16, that subsection K requires each county to report on their on the projects and the amounts that they've expended on those projects.
Yeah, if we're going to leave OSLI in there. So far we are.
Yeah. I think there's
Yeah.
things they do that are
Yeah.
important. Even if they got
Yeah.
the amount of.
Yes.
Sorry, if we, is there a way, and I'd ask Brian this, to obligate the state land board to approve so this doesn't become something in the future? I mean, it's been on consent. That's appropriate. I don't think we want it to be decided or denied. I don't know that there's any clear mechanism for that through this, but.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, any way to say that they don't have to approve or they do?
So that it's not really subject to their approval, so that we have the reporting requirement, we have the process taking place, but it's been on consent. I'm just worried about a future where somehow somebody decides to be political about it and then it comes to a vote. And I'm trying to avoid it being something they're voting on.
Yep. So Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, two options. One would be similar to that bridge loan, that small business loan program would be just to say no further approval by SLIBs required. The language on page 6, so in that staff comment, it may also help get there as well. It's pretty clear, particularly that paragraph 4, that once OSLI receives a list of the capital projects, meaning that the counties have reached their, and the cities and towns have reached their consensus, then the office shall disperse the funds. So it's a clear direction that once they get the list, the fund shall be distributed.
Mr. Chairman, Brian, would they still have the reporting requirement that Representative Weber was talking about?
So Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, yes, that language on page 8 would be left alone if you just, that language on page 6 is intended to replace, now as amended, that language on page 5. So it just takes that process and expands it out, makes it a little more clear as to how that could work. And certainly within the committee's prerogative to tweak that, but that was just one example of maybe outlining a little more how this could work.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to accept the language in the staff comment on page 6 in replacement of the prior language.
Replacing paragraph D.
Well, that
whole page. It replaces paragraph D.
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
Completely.
Yep, correct.
Yep.
That's
Moved and seconded to replace paragraph D completely with page 6 information.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
those subject to the prior Lawley amendment, because that tweaks that as well. Or actually, I guess, yeah, Lawley amendment as well as the revision to how the decision's made, so not,
We have a couple,
not taking out the previous amendments, I guess I'll
Yeah.
say.
not eliminating the previous amendments. Yeah, yeah. Further discussion? All in favor of replacing paragraph D with the new paragraph D and the amendments that we've already passed? Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Paragraph D has been modified. Any other amendments before we table this good little bill? No further amendments. We'll table this bill number 20, LSO number 20, till the next meeting, when we hear more from the county commissioners and from the JAC. But we have a bill that's been amended. Can we have that written up and done up? So the whole board has the new bill?
Yep. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll take these amendments, make a new version. It'll be available for the committee's August meeting.
Yep.
Can we share that with JAC before the meeting?
Do we want to?
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like me to, Chairman Heiner, if you'd like to direct me to include that with, their materials as well, I can make that request of JAC.
Mr. Chairman, I make that motion that we
Yep.
share that.
Yep.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and the chairman will make the prerogative that we share it with the JAC. We don't get to vote on that.
Fine.
Executive decision. Whoa.
Executive
Boy,
decision there.
rush goes.
Yeah.
Power.
Hey, I feel that power, huh? Did you feel that? Yeah. All right. We got that bill taken care of. I think, other than the information on the next meeting on August 27th and 28th in Cheyenne, do we have anything else, Brad? Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we didn't take motions on the business council, and I had one, and so this is probably a good time to do that. The tome of information on the various programs that we received, which is about 130 pages long, goes through and provides agency recommendations for many of the programs on how there's a desire to have some statutory revision associated with those programs. And I count around 15 of those agency revisions. Some of them are get rid of this program. Some of them are tweak this program. And so my motion will be for next time to have a bill drafted to go through and implement those recommendations into one piece of legislation that we can consider next time. I reviewed all of those changes, and they all seem pretty reasonable to me as something certainly to talk about. So that'll give us the ability to work that next time through that bill draft. So that's my motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Will we discuss this the day before we meet with the JAC and have that ready
We
for
can.
the JAC
That's up to
meeting?
you to put it
That's
on the
going to be
agenda.
up to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You guys can
Let
decide
that power flow through.
Yeah, be the power.
I think that's the way we want to do it. We want to discuss this bill the day before and either pass it or don't pass it, and then we'll take it to the JAC, what we have modified. Does that work?
Mr. Chairman, I'll need to consult with, I'm not sure it's been set in stone which day we were going to meet jointly. It may be the first day. So I'll need to consult with them. If you'd like it for the second day, we can.
We want to meet with them the second day,
Okay.
not the first day. We got business we need to take care of the first day.
Okay. That's what we'll plan on doing.
Motion on the table to have a bill that takes care of all those business council issues that they brought up. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Anything else to come before the Minerals Economic Development and Business Community?
That's all I had.
Hearing none. Anything else, Mr. Fuller?
Mr. Chairman, nothing other than to, I can run through what the committee did in the last 2 days if you wish.
Okay,
Okay.
if you can do it fairly quickly.
I can, Mr. Chairman. So over the last 2 days, Mr. Chairman, the committee sponsored the following bills: 27 LSO 19, enhanced oil recovery severance tax exemption reporting. The chairman directed that to be a Senate file. The committee voted to sponsor 27 LSO 22, produced water regulation for oil and gas purposes, a House bill. And then 27 LSO 25, industrial siting mineral processing facility exemption, The chairman did not designate which house that would start in. Of course, that can be decided at a later date. The committee continued 2 bill drafts from this meeting to the next meeting. First, 27 LSO 23, utilities regulation exception for electricity generation, and then 27 LSO 20, the consensus program with the committee's amendments. And that will be shared with JAC. The committee requested 3 new bill drafts. First, a bill draft based on 25 LSO 70, the upfront impact assistance payments. A bill draft based on the proposed Public Service Commission rules for non-public utility generators, and then a bill draft based on the Business Council's language that was included in their materials. Then there were 2 bill drafts at this meeting on which the committee took no action and will not be continued to the next meeting. Those were 27 LSO 21, impact assistance payments, prepayments and bonding, and then 27 LSO 24, energy transmission loan program. And the next meeting is scheduled for August 27th and 28th in Cheyenne.
Thank you. Thank you. There being no further business to come before the Minerals Committee, we are adjourned. Pretty good. Just in time for lunch.